What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was reincarnated as a god, and fell in love with a human who hated him? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. New York City, the heart of the Western civilization. It comprises of 5 boroughs sitting where the Hudson River meets the Atlantic Ocean. With a population of approximately 8.6 million, it is the most populated city of the United States. A global power city, New York City has been described as the cultural, financial, and media capital of the world. Or that is what Wikipedia will tell you. What it won't tell you, however, is that New York City is in fact home to the most powerful beings of the dimension. It also won't tell you that these beings are the governing forces of the world, or simply gods. Yes, you read it right. Gods, not God. There is no single god. In fact, there are over 3,142 gods and goddesses. However, 3,130 out of these 3,142 gods don't get much screen time. It's the 12 major gods that steal the show. The 12 Olympians. And now coming back to the 8.6 million people who reside in the same city as these gods. Most of these morons live on their fragile human lives without having any idea of the existence of these beings. Even though everyone has heard of Greek gods, the flashing, booming Zeus, the dark, reclusive Hades, yet most don't know that they actually exist. And rightly so. Imagine the global chaos that would suddenly erupt when one day people wake up to see 12 divine beings claiming to have control over the entire earth and the elements that are fundamental in how things go on every day. Not exactly an ideal situation, is it? So the gods keep existing in secrecy. Or do they really? In the countless decades that these powerful beings have ruled over the planet, they've left certain impressions, their own marks, and have substantially influenced the development of humanity. It is hard to imagine what the earth would have been like if the Olympians and other minor gods hadn't played a role in keeping the broken bicycle known as humanity going. Probably better off, but we won't talk about that. So for these reasons, people keep on living in the dark, without having any knowledge of the natural, or rather, supernatural forces that govern them. And a part of these 8.6 million morons was one young blonde-haired man. He walked the streets of Fifth Avenue, Manhattan, without any idea of the existence of these beings that we have been discussing about. A bag was slung over his shoulders, and he was wearing a simple black t-shirt and blue denim jeans that were particularly tight around his ass. A wonderful and muscular ass, it should be mentioned. In fact, it was this wonderful ass combined with his equally wonderfully attractive looks, and weird fox-like whiskers on his face, that got him the attention of a lot of women, who were giving him lusty stares. This was nothing new to one Naruto Namikaze, the owner of the fine ass and attractive looks. Neither was walking down the streets of Fifth Avenue every day back from his college and staring at the brightly lit skyscraper with a spire extending so far above the other buildings that it seemed to penetrate the sky itself. The seat of Mount Olympus, known to Naruto as the Empire State Building and nothing more. Naruto had surely changed over the years. Gone was once the grinning, hyperactive orange-clad ninja who was as positive as a proton with an attitude that was as bright as the sun. Replacing him was this tall, lean man wearing dark clothes and an expression that seemed uncaring, almost apathetic to the events happening around him. He had grown his hair out quite a bit too and had left it messy and textured as it fell over one side of his face, covering his forehead, left eye and almost reaching down to his lips. It wasn't crazily long. Naruto had no willingness to go around looking like a blonde Jesus, but a hair length of over 6 inches seemed to be the only way he could control his insanely spiky hair. He had also grown a bit of a stubble and was calmly puffing out smoke into the air from the cigarette he was smoking. The "smoking kills" concept didn't really apply to him, so he was making the best out of his gifts, he supposed. Lost in his thoughts, he had been walking for some time now and hadn't realized that he had walked a couple of blocks ahead of his house. It wasn't a difficult thing to do, considering the shady alley he lived in. Turning back, he walked towards the little apartment the blonde had rented for himself. Since he never actually liked to go through the effort of locking his door as the probability of a robber choosing to rob a dirty apartment in a dirtier alley was close to none, he directly opened it and entered his small abode. As he was walking in, his head hit the frame of the door and he muttered a little curse. Being 6 feet 2 inches had its disadvantages after all. He went into his completely normal house, crashed on his completely normal bed, and fell asleep after his completely normal long day. Something that was quite not normal, however, was the place he went to after he fell asleep. Naruto had entered his mindscape. Not a normal feat either, you should know, as the average human has no idea that a mindscape even existed inside their mind. It was close to inaccessible for normal humans, and since no one was actually quite sure of its existence, there wasn't much information as to why it existed. Although, its size in a normal human would be close to the size of a small room. Naruto, however, held the whole of his continent inside his head. Looking over at the beautiful village, his beautiful village, fond memories of his childhood rushed back at him. As they always did. The village was utterly empty though, and the blonde sat down at the roof of what used to be his office a long, long time ago, and found peace with the silence, as he always did. A ringing of an alarm clock was supposed to wake him up the next morning, but when a loud crash was what interrupted his sleep in the middle of the night, Naruto wasn't exactly pleased. As he ran a hand through his long messy hair and prepared to get up from his bed, he heard another loud crash and then the sound of something toppling over. He groaned and moved towards his door, opening it. He had expected to see a drunkard who had knocked over a dustbin or had knocked himself over in a dustbin. Instead, he saw a boy with the legs of a donkey, lying unconscious in the alley, sprawled over the concrete. And then he saw another creature, standing over a corner of the alley. It seemed that a boy-donkey hybrid wasn't enough weirdness for one night, he also needed to have a scary bat monster thrown into the mix. The creature had his back to him and was easily a foot taller than he was, and very thin. With two bat-like wings erupting from his hunched back and his rocky, scaly skin, he looked like a gargoyle. A living, breathing gargoyle with razor-sharp claws. Even though he was no one to talk about weirdness, being a ninja who fought on backs of gigantic toads, that was a long time ago. He wasn't in that business anymore, and he wanted no part of his to get back into it. Rubbing his eyes furiously, he muttered, "Be a figment of my imagination. Please be just a figment of my imagination." Taking his fingers off his eyes, he sincerely hoped to see nothing strange but an empty alley, but was instead greeted by the razor-sharp teeth and large eyes of the creature looking right at him, who seemed to have heard his unanswered prayer and turned. Naruto groaned loudly with a pained expression on his face. Then, he screamed, "Fuck no. I am not having any part of this. You aren't real, and that's the end of it." He looked almost close to sobbing. The monster grinned, his gruesome smile revealing more rows of dagger-like teeth. He took a few steps towards Naruto and took a long whiff. Naruto stepped back and pointed at the monster. "Ukai, demonic lemur. Step back a bit," he continued, "this interaction between you and me?" The monster nodded along, as if curious of what the blonde had to say. It was always fun to toy with the prey before the actual preying part came in. "It never happened," Naruto said firmly, and then he repeated, "Never," as if trying to convince himself. He then got back into his house, slept away and woke up the next day knowing that he had a crazy-ass dream the previous night. Or at least he was planning to do so until the monster's wings flapped and he started hovering a few feet above the ground. "Am I visible to you, mortal?" the ugly creature asked in a voice as raspy as sandpaper on a blackboard. Immediately, Naruto noticed that behind the creature was a scared and sobbing little girl crouched over the corner with her face buried in her knees. She had covered her head with both her hands in fear and was shaking. The monster's wide wingspan had hidden the girl behind himself and Naruto hadn't noticed her before. He just sighed. He couldn't pretend that nothing had occurred in his alley anymore, or leave the scene to go back to sleep, no matter how much he wanted to leave himself out of anything that was even slightly not normal. It would probably result in the girl and donkey centaur becoming gargoyle food. And he couldn't have that. "You aren't just visible, you are disturbingly loud too," Naruto said in a scolding tone. "The thing is, if you had decided to do whatever you were planning on doing few blocks away, I wouldn't have cared. Mostly because I wouldn't have been awake to care about it. But this alley is close to my house, and you disturbed my sleep." The monster seemed to process whatever the tall human had said to him for a moment. It almost sounded like a threat, the thought of which made him roar out with laughter in typical monstrous giggling fashion. "You talk too much, mortal," he said after his laughter died down, and then exclaimed, "What a treat. A demigod, a satyr and a clear-sighted mortal. This will be a tasty feast." The hoarseness of the creature's voice made Naruto's ears hurt. Jabbing his index finger into his ear and furiously wiggling it back and forth, his eyes fell back on the little girl. Sarah was a 9-year-old and she was supposed to be a demigod, from what her satyr friend had told her. He had been escorting her towards this camp for children like her when the monster had sniffed them out and started chasing them. She had begged to whatever god could hear her to help her. Was this strange man the answer to her prayers? Even though he did not look the part, wiggling his finger in his ear with such ferocity that his long hair had fallen over his whole face, he still could save them from the monster, right? Naruto kept on jabbing in his index finger into his ear, trying to make the itchiness caused by the monster's voice go away while said monster looked on in bewilderment. He wasn't so sure of eating the mortal now, the man didn't look quite normal. What if he had a funny taste? Suddenly, Naruto scratched his ear a certain way and the itch disappeared. Emerging victorious from his battle with his own ear, Naruto noticed the scared girl looking at him hopefully. He sent the scared girl a reassuring smile and ran a hand through his hair to push it back, sneakily wiping the ear wax on his other hand on the wall. He then looked the monster dead in the eye and said, "Your feast won't be quite as tasty if I can help it." In speeds the monster wouldn't have thought possible from a normal human. Naruto jumped high into the air and delivered an uppercut to the monster's jaw with such ferocity that he soared a few more feet into the air, but this time not because of his wings. Falling to the ground due to the imbalance caused by the ridiculously hard punch, the beast's head was ringing and his vision was blurry. On pure instinct alone he managed to shoot up into the air, barely dodging a kick that he was sure would have taken his head right off. Just as Naruto's feet came back on the ground from his leap, the monster swooped in and grabbed his hands in his sharp talons, his razor-sharp nails digging into his biceps. The monster was planning to render his insanely strong arms useless by puncturing his biceps, and then taking him for a short flight and dropping him from a height. Even though he enjoyed devouring his prey alive, this one seemed too risky to be allowed to live any longer. Ouch, 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 Naruto said in a rapid pace in the manner a puppy whines when kicked. Then clearing his throat once and composing himself, he said, "Okay, if you're planning on dropping me from like a crazy altitude, forewarning, it won't work." Still soaring up higher and higher, the monster raised an eyebrow and asked, "Why's that?" Naruto winced again at the creature's painful voice and grunted out, "Because you'll never get high enough." He kicked his legs behind him with the monster's talons still buried in his arm to generate momentum and swung ahead in a manner that a trapeze artist swings on a bar and kicked the chest of the monster with both his toes. His arm did twist in a grotesque manner, but his maneuver had the desired effect. His feral enemy's chest cavity seemed to have sunk in due to the pure impact of his kick. It spat blood, roared out and dropped him. Falling to the ground from a height of over 70 feet, Naruto balanced himself mid-air with the grace of a cat and fell back to the ground back on his feet, the impact making his whole body shake violently. He looked up, ready for the monster to attack again, but his combatant couldn't balance himself in time and was falling towards the ground at insane speeds. Just a few floors above the alley, his body smacked against a window overhang and burst into golden dust with one last scream, raining upon the blonde like a rain of molten gold. The gold powder it had dissipated into was very unnecessary, and quite irritating as well in Naruto's opinion, as it stuck to his whole body and made him itchy. "Glitter is such a bitch," he remarked with an irritated glare towards the window overhang as if it was the root cause of all this trouble, before he looked down at the state his arms were in. Pulling up his t-shirt sleeve with his teeth, he wasn't too surprised to see the condition they were in. Dripping with blood and so twisted due to his near-suicidal act that they looked like a wet red crumpled sheet of cloth. That'll take a while to heal," he thought, before proceeding to scold himself. Note to the future Naruto. No more acrobatic stunts that do more harm than good. He channeled Kurama's chakra to his arms as the hole in his biceps started mending itself and the bones started rearranging themselves to their former state, albeit much slower than they used to. He pulled the sleeves down with his teeth since his arms hurt so much he couldn't move them. The little girl did not have to be subjected to such a grotesque sight. Meanwhile, Sarah stared at the turning blonde's back with her mouth hung open and eyes wide in fascination. She had just witnessed a human beat a monster senseless and jump back to the ground in typical hero fashion from a crazy height, complete with the little dust cloud at his feet and all. Glittering like some new age vampire because of the street lamp illuminating the gold dust on his whole figure. He really did seem like the answer to her prayers. Naruto advanced towards the little girl, and looked down to the ground and politely asked the baffled girl, "What is your name, kid?" She took a moment to process that her protector was actually talking to her and she softly muttered, "Sarah," the fascinated expression still on her face. She got up slowly, dusted herself off, and to his pleasant surprise, jumped on him and hung there, wrapping both her arms around his neck. She then proceeded to bawl loudly on his t-shirt. I was so scared," the girl managed to say between her sobs. "Thank you so very much." "I'd say, you're welcome, if you hadn't wiped snot all over my t-shirt," the blonde said in a strict tone, but when he saw that it did nothing to quiet the sobbing child in his arms, he said, "Hush now, it's all right. The monster is gone." Seeing that the child didn't seem to get off of his head, he told her to climb up on shoulders and sit there, since he himself couldn't pick her up and place her there with his arms. He walked towards the other boy laying unconsciously, spread out on the alley. "Who's your friend?" Sarah looked at Liam with a pout on her face. "He's a satyr. He was supposed to take me to this camp for children like me and be my protector, but he fainted as soon as he saw the monster." Paying special attention to when Sarah said, "children like me," he decided not to ask her about it since she seemed quite put off by her encounter. "Well, I guess we'll just have to leave him out here since I can't actually move my arms," he said in an uncaring manner as he started walking back to his door. Sarah gasped as if the prospect was unacceptable, and said, "But it's cold outside." Naruto chuckled, "Believe me, Sarah, in this part of the city, the cold is your least dangerous enemy." Okay, so maybe it wasn't that dangerous, but the horrified gasp that Sarah let out made the exaggeration worth it. "But he's my friend," she exclaimed. Naruto stopped dead in his tracks suddenly and turned back to face the unconscious satyr, and made a show of thinking for a moment. I suppose I could kick him all the way into the house." "No," was Sarah's quick shout. Naruto chuckled again. "Relax, he'll be fine out here. I'm just playing with you." Sarah pouted with an angry expression on her face as the blonde man took her to his house, and almost managed to kill her because he forgot to duck at the low-heighted apartment door. She was only breathing because she had screamed loudly at the last second to warn him. "It wouldn't have killed you, you know," Naruto said, wincing at the girl's loud voice. "It would have. I'd be lying on the floor with a bleeding head and you'd have another unsensu kid to deal with." Naruto burst out laughing. Sarah pouted again. "Why are you laughing?" Naruto continued to laugh just for the sake of riling up the child and said, "I think you meant to say, unconscious." Sarah looked away embarrassed even though Naruto couldn't see it since she was on his shoulders, and shouted, "Whatever. I have a problem with big words." "Yeah, I noticed." Naruto chuckled again, and reaching his bedroom, he told the girl to get off on his bed. She jumped on the fluffy mattress and sighed happily. "Don't touch anything," he warned her and said, "and I'll get something for you to eat." Some sensation had now returned in his arms and his bones had mended slightly, but even the act of pouring milk into a bowl felt like having his hand flattened by a hydraulic press. Coming back with a bowl of cornflakes and strawberry-flavored hot milk, don't judge a man for liking strawberry milk, he entered the room and almost had a panic attack. Placing the bowl on top of his shelf gently so as to not hurt his hands with sudden movement, he rushed to the exploring child, pulled the paper with strange writings on it away from her, and tucked it in his pocket. Even that felt like pushing his hands into a pit of lava, but if he hadn't, Sarah too probably wouldn't have functional hands anymore. And she didn't seem like she had an unnaturally potent healing ability. "I told you not to touch anything. But it was just a piece of paper. A piece of paper that could have killed you, for real this time. That makes no sense and you know it. Shut up and eat your cornflakes." Looking at the pink milk and the aroma carried by the steam waving off the lukewarm milk, it could only be strawberry, her favorite flavor. She immediately jumped up on the bed and started eating. Naruto pulled out a chair from under his desk, wincing at how much it took out of him, and sat down facing the little girl sitting on his bed, happily eating away. "Just don't spill any milk on the sheets," he said, but the girl did not even give a hint of having listened to him. He sighed and decided that he would ask her about her strange statement before, now that she was calm and felt safe. Even if he did not intend on involving himself into the supernatural aspect of things, he would hate to admit it, but he had already stuck himself in there. And once you're in, there's no getting out, which is one of the prime reasons why he had always turned a blind eye to all the supernatural occurrences he came across on a daily basis in the streets of New York. Children running around the alleys with bronze swords in their hands and taxis zooming around at supersonic speeds and chugging out black smoke without anyone noticing were things that you became used to if you had ninja senses and you lived in Manhattan. So Sarah, when you said that your friend was taking you to a camp for children like you, what did you mean? Looking up from her bowl, she stared at the blonde with a reluctant expression. Well, Liam told me not to tell anyone, but you fought the monster and saved our lives, so I guess you're okay. Naruto nodded, gesturing her to continue. So, you have heard of the Greek gods, right? She asked hopefully as if she desperately wanted him to say yes. Seems like she has been dying to talk about it to someone. I think so, yes. Naruto thought hard for a moment, trying to recall all the weird names he had heard in movies and in passing, Zeus, Hades, Athena, etc., right? Sarah nodded furiously and smiled. Yep. They're real. Naruto did not look baffled or disbelieving, which came as a surprise to Sarah. If anyone other than Liam had been the one to tell her about her parentage, she would not have believed them either. You look so calm. Did you already know this? The little girl asked him. It would be so boring if you already knew because then you wouldn't find it interesting. Naruto shook his head. Nope. I didn't have any idea. I'm just thinking of why I never noticed them before or something, you know. Well, Liam told me that they stay hidden on purpose and dict. She struggled in trying to form the word, and Naruto lent a helping hand. Dictate, you mean? Yep, they dictate the forces that run the world, she said cheerfully. They live on Mount Olympus, which is above the Empire State Building. I don't really understand that, but one of them is supposed to be my parent. And the camp he's taking me to is a camp of hundreds of children like me. Naruto now raised an eyebrow, and Liam was the one to tell you all this? Sarah nodded again. Yeah, he was my only friend at the orphanage. He was always helping me out and looking out for me. Weird things would always happen around me and monsters would keep attacking me. But everyone said that I just made things up. But Liam always believed me. Naruto nodded and nudged her to keep going. So when he told me it was because I wasn't an orphan and one of my parents was a god, I was so happy. Naruto could see this system working. These so-called gods controlled the forces of the worlds or maybe supervised them, and occasionally had a child with a human in classic Greek mythology fashion. Even though he was not aware of many basic workings of the modern world, he was not ignorant. But if that was the case, why leave them out here to face these difficulties? No child deserved to be fighting monsters before they have even hit puberty. He had seen enough children who had to struggle or even killed to survive growing up, and it wasn't something he could ever appreciate. Do you know who exactly your godly parent is, Sarah? Sarah's bottom lip protruded out in a sad expression and she muttered no. Why didn't your godly parent contact you sooner? Why aren't they the ones to be escorting you? Sarah thought for a moment and she said, Liam told me that it doesn't work like that. The gods are very busy so they cannot come down here. There was also something about an ancient law but I couldn't understand whatever he told me. She said sheepishly and bit her lip in embarrassment. Naruto nodded in understanding. All right then, Sarah. I'll tuck you in and you can sleep. You must be very tired, and tomorrow you can continue your journey. He tucked her in bed and turned out the lights. The little girl shouted happily, good night, before realizing she didn't actually know her savior's name. Naruto smiled and said, it's Naruto. Naruto, she said it out loud again and giggled, you have a funny name, Naruto. I wish my name was as funny as yours. Not knowing whether he should be offended or pleased, he just said, good night, Sarah. Sleep well, with a chuckle. When Naruto got back to thinking about the newly revealed information, he came to realize that it was a classic case of bad and irresponsible parentage. He shook his head and pitied himself for yet again managing to involve himself where he wasn't supposed to involve himself. He had been trying to avoid exactly this type of thing. He had affected way too many timelines now to try and influence more. He had a much more go-with-the-flow attitude now, not opting to do anything and going where the current took him. But it seemed like the current itself wanted him to swim against it. And he was fucking tired already of swimming against it. Liam's eyes opened to an unexpected sight of a clear morning sky overhead. He wondered if he had somehow been reborn as a flower inside a house's window. Then he realized that flowers did not have goat legs, or eyes for that matter. The events of the previous night rushed back to him. It was all going good. He was escorting Sarah towards the Midtown Tunnel, which connected the borough to Long Island, and he was telling her all that a new half-blood needed to know. Until they had been attacked by the monster, of course. Panicking as he remembered the monster, he hopped up to his feet and looked around, expecting it to come at him any second. When he could neither find the monster and nor his best friend he was supposed to protect, he fell to the ground on his goat knees and started sobbing. The girl he had befriended over the past couple months was in some random monster's belly now, and it was his fault. He knew that would be his last days as a merry satyr, and that he had failed his mission. The regret of having his friend killed because he was too weak was so heavy that he couldn't stop the tears from flowing. He sobbed loudly and made goat noises. "Okay, did you just bleat right now?" a curious voice asked. Liam looked to his right to see a man leaning on the doorframe by his side, looking at him with an amused smile on his face. Without wasting a breath, he asked him loudly, "Have you seen my friend? She was 9 and had brown hair. Please tell me you've seen her, please." Naruto looked at the satyr for a couple more seconds and then nodded, "Yep. I've seen her." A surge of relief spread through Liam's chest. "Thank Olympus." "Where?" "Well, yesterday night there was this large beast who chomped her down," Naruto said with a serious face, "said she was quite tasty too." The surge of relief was gone as soon as it came. Liam couldn't find any words. His mouth was dry and it felt like the weight that had been taken off his chest had been dropped back twice as hard. "Damn, are you having a seizure?" Naruto looked on, now alarmed. Okay, stop. Your friend is safely sleeping on my bed. Nothing's happened to her. I was just messing with you." Naruto said the truth before the poor kid died of a convulsion. Liam looked relieved for a moment, before staring up at the tall blonde angrily. "You found it funny, huh?" Naruto grinned. "I found it very funny." He turned around and gestured the donkey to follow him inside. Liam gritted his teeth in pure rage and followed the irritating man into his house. Just before he stepped foot into the house, Naruto turned around and looked him dead in the eye with the look of a killer, the shade falling on him in the narrow hallway shadowing his face and making him look even scarier than the monster. "I find one strand of donkey hair on my carpets, you'll pay." Liam looked offended instead of scared. "I'm not a donkey. I am a goat. The type of animal doesn't matter. Any animal fur is valid ground for severe punishment." "How do you say that with a straight face?" Liam asked, sounding innocently curious. "It's because I'm damn serious. I love eating goat." Liam backed away from the maniac. "Don't eat my kin. You worry about not getting yourself eaten." With that, Naruto turned back and led him to the bedroom. By this point terrified, he was certainly relieved to find his best friend unharmed, sleeping and drooling away on the man's pillow. It seemed like he hadn't completely failed his mission after all. "Found you both in the monster's grasp. If I hadn't shown up in time, maybe then you'd really have something to bawl about," Naruto said, and then a thoughtful expression came on his face, "or maybe not. Since you'd be dead too." Liam lowered his head. He had brought shame to himself and the satyr order by endangering his companion, but that was when a curious thought struck his mind. "How could you see the monster? And my legs?" Liam could clearly smell that the man in front of him was a human, and he had never before heard of mortals who could see through the mist. Tut, look carefully. The two things that are embedded in my skull just below my forehead, they are called eyes," Naruto said with dry sarcasm. "No, I mean, you are a mortal. You shouldn't have been able to see my legs." Liam was confused. Hearing that, Naruto raised an eyebrow. "So is there like a mechanism that hides all of this from mortal eyes?" Liam raised his eyebrows, and Naruto said, "Sarah told me about the whole Greek gods are real thing. So I'm cool, you can tell me." Liam nodded. "Oh okay, it is called the mist and it shrouds everything that a mortal isn't supposed to see, things like monsters and divine stuff." Naruto had seen the monster too, so he wasn't surprised that the young adult didn't seem too baffled. That would explain why no one other than me ever seems to notice the abnormalities, like that taxi car incident once. And those kids going around the subway with gleaming swords. Naruto thought. Liam meanwhile was thinking hard too. "Well, Chiron did tell me something about clear-sighted mortals or something, but I don't really remember. Chiron's lessons are too boring," he said embarrassedly. "Chiron?" The satyr nodded again. "Yep. He is the one who trains and teaches us in our camp." Naruto made a mental note to grab Chiron and make him gurgle answers if he came across him. But for now, it was enough weirdness for one day. He was in, but that didn't mean he would keep digging to go in deeper. The lesser he involved himself, the better. Speaking of training and teaching, how'd you beat that monster? Being a human and all? Liam asked curiously. He had never heard of humans ever standing up to monsters and coming out alive at that. Was the blonde a demigod too and just had never found out? But that couldn't be, he smelled like a normal human. I set my dog on him and he ran away, was Naruto's curt reply. Wait, you have a dog? Liam never got along with dogs. And they didn't usually get along too well with satyrs. I just told you, he ran away, Naruto said seriously. Liam had a very confused expression on his face, but I thought, you said the monster ran away. He muttered to himself. You can take the girl to this camp of yours, Naruto started, although I expect a nice thank you card, along with the pleasure of you leaving my house as soon as you can. Thank you? Liam was even more confused. The name is Naruto. You're welcome. Please leave. I've got college. Geez man, no one asked you to save us and then bring us to your home in the first place. Liam decided that even though he was grateful that Naruto had saved him, he didn't like him much. Do you know how uncomfortable explaining a dead child along with a dead weird donkey-ass teen to the police would have been? The blonde looked at Liam with an annoyed expression on his face. In turn, Liam looked back, even more annoyed. I told you already, I am a goat. And I told you already, it doesn't matter. Liam shook his head angrily. Very well then. You've made it clear that you don't want us here. We'll be leaving now, Liam said, as he walked over to the sleeping girl, his every step creating a loud sound because of his hooves, which only served to annoy the blonde even more. He woke Sarah, who was sleepy at first, and then overjoyed to see her only friend safe and conscious. Meanwhile, Liam sniffled. I'm so sorry, Sarah, he said, almost to the point of tears. I know I was supposed to protect you but instead I was weak. Sarah just smiled at him, but we're okay now, so it's okay. Liam raised his head and looked at his best friend, truly glad that they were safe. Your cute kindergarten reunion is over? Naruto asked, pretending to be annoyed. In response, Sarah jumped off the bed and hugged Naruto around his waist, since she was much shorter than him. Thank you, Naruto, for saving me and Liam. He couldn't help but smile and ruffled the girl's long, brown hair as Liam looked on sulking. You want a hug too? He asked the goat in an effort to rile him up even more. Hell no, he screamed in return. Well, I wasn't offering, Naruto said and then added with a disgusted look, I wouldn't want any of your donkey fur sticking on my pants. Liam gritted his teeth in pure rage, and told Sarah they were leaving. But won't Naruto come with us? She asked Liam and then looked at Naruto hopefully. Nope, I've got college, so I can't, he said, shattering her hopes and making her pout. You guys go on. Be safe, kids, Naruto said, eyeing the satyr in particular who didn't miss it and looked down in embarrassment. Not too long after, they left. And not too long after, Naruto grabbed his jacket and wore his favorite flip-flops and left too, but not for his college. A disturbing thought had made its way into his head. If the kids were attacked once, they could be attacked again. Even though his arms weren't completely healed from yesterday night's incident, he could still use his legs pretty effectively. And he could also use this opportunity to meet Chiron. After quite a while of following Sarah and Liam undetected, through subways and buses, when they got into a cab, Naruto decided that he'd had enough. He'd had to do some ninja running yet again, and they tended to get tiring since he was so out of practice. Only if he could find a cab. That was when his eyes fell upon the speeding yellow vehicle and he whistled at it. But he did it so loud that all the traffic on the road stopped. Thankfully, the kid's cab had already gone on quite ahead. Scratching his head sheepishly, he got into the cab. And he promptly realized he had no idea where the camp was. Mentally annoyed at himself, he told the driver to tail the cab speeding off into the distance and inside the Midtown tunnel without being noticed. The cabbie looked at him with a raised eyebrow, as if needing an explanation along with the directions too. Not being able to think of any better excuses, Naruto gritted his teeth and said, man. Inside that cab is my girlfriend with my best friend, and I have no idea what they're doing zooming off into the sunrise. Giving the blonde a sympathetic nod and with a pained expression on his face, the cabbie started tailing the other taxi. Not long after, Sarah and Liam's cabs stopped and they hopped out, and continued walking ahead on the road on foot. Seeing a girl who couldn't be older than 10 and a young boy walk out of the cab they had been tailing, Naruto's cabbie suddenly twitched violently and hit the brakes. The cab skidded on the empty road and its driver looked at Naruto disgustedly. "That little girl is your girlfriend?" he screamed at the blonde. Naruto sighed, and just got out of the cab and dropped the fare on his seat and mumbled a small, "Thank you," and started walking away, the cabbie still looking at him as if he was the worst human alive. The kids still did not seem to have noticed him, he had been tailing them from quite a distance. As they kept on walking, Naruto couldn't help but notice the dark clouds that were gathering in the sky, hiding the sun and casting the area in a shroud of semi-dark. It wasn't long before Naruto heard a roar off into the distance that surely couldn't have been made by any animal that was a part of Long Island's fauna. Alarmed, he increased his pace to catch up with the kids who were about a quarter of a mile ahead of him. From the other end of the road emerged a monster carrying a battle axe that looked heavier than the monster itself, and looking at him Naruto's first impression was that it was a walking cow on steroids. When Sarah saw it, she screamed loudly, and Liam shouted, "It is blocking the road to the camp, we'll have to make a run for it." They ran off the road and into the woods that were on both sides of the road, and seeing them take off, the monster started running towards them as well, his beefy legs giving him enough momentum to surprise even Naruto. No cow should be able to run like the wind. Gritting his teeth and taking a deep breath, he started running towards the humanoid bull monster. But he wasn't as fast, and just as he was 30 yards away from the beast, it caught up to the running kids and swung his battle axe in a wide arc. Naruto's breath caught in his throat, and all he could do was shout wildly, "Duck!" Thankfully, Sarah was nimble enough that she bent her back forwards just as the lethal weapon swung over her, but Liam did not have ADHD or hard-wired Greek battle skills. The axe hit him full in the face. Expecting a satyr head to come soaring at him any second now, Naruto was surprised when it did not. The shaft of the battle axe was too long and the monster had been targeting Sarah, who had been running just a little ahead of her best friend. Liam was hit with the shoulder of the battle axe handle. He was thrown off balance and flew through the air for a few feet before hitting the ground hard, unconscious. Again, at least this time he isn't on the floor because of fainting, Naruto thought with a grimace. Before the beast could ready himself after his wild swing and go after Sarah, Naruto picked up a pebble between his index and middle finger from the ground and swung his wrist in the motion that was used to throw the kunai with 2 fingers. The pebble shot towards the large creature and hit him square in his right eye, popping it. The beast roared in pain, and Naruto looked at Sarah, who seemed to be frozen in fear after seeing Liam. She had tears in her eyes, but seeing Naruto she looked surprised too. And was that a hint of relief that he saw in her eyes? The former ninja gestured to her to run, but she looked at Liam as if she wouldn't go without taking him. Naruto looked her right in the eye and said, "Don't be stupid. I've got this. Run, now," and run she did. Even though she seemed reluctant at first, she seemed to trust the blonde. Meanwhile, the second monster that Naruto was facing off against in a time span of fewer than 24 hours had dropped his huge weapon to the ground and was clutching his face in his large hands and screaming in pain. "Never knew bulls could howl like wolves," the blonde said with dry humor, as he kept walking towards the Minotaur. The bull-headed monster removed his hands from his face and looked at Naruto, and he managed to get a good look at the creature standing in front of him. It was a monster with the head of a bull and the body of a man and was incredibly muscled and beefy. It wasn't much taller than Naruto was, and had fur from about the belly button on up. He had one single curved horn on his head, the other one seemed to have been broken off at the base. Naruto supposed this was the Minotaur he had seen in that one movie. He decided that they had done a poor job of creating the creature's likeness. It seemed much more ferocious standing in front of him, glaring at him with pure rage in one eye and the other bleeding golden blood. The Minotaur bent slowly to pick up his dropped weapon, eyes never leaving Naruto as if daring him to make a move. But he wasn't planning on making one. In his current state, and with his arms having no more strength than that of a pre-teen, he would never be able to fight him head-on. He needed to think of something, and fast. The ground seemed to be sloping towards his left and deeper into the forest. But before he could give that fact much thought, his enemy was upon him in an instant. As it swung his deadly weapon, Naruto got a certificate of how sharp it was by just the shrill sound it made by cutting the air. Falling to the ground on his hands in an instant, He let the blade soar harmlessly above him and pushed himself up just as fast. Wincing as his arms felt like they were dipped in acid by just pushing himself up, he decided to go for another move that was sure to hurt like a bitch. He grabbed the handle of the blade, planning on pulling it out of the Minotaur's grasp by using the strength of his shoulder and reducing the strain on his arms. But the combined trajectory of the heavy weapon, his wrecked arms, and the Minotaur's strength overwhelmed him and he was pulled along with the blade. Losing his balance, Naruto fell to the ground on his stomach, where he was swiftly kicked in the side with a hoof. He skidded for a few feet on the ground before managing to get himself up with a loud groan. He felt as if he definitely had a few cracked ribs, but he could still think straight due to his insane pain tolerance. This beast was on a whole another level in comparison to the one he had battled yesterday night. He wouldn't stand a chance against it if he didn't do something to end the battle quickly. The large man-like bull sped towards Naruto, his axe raised over his head and as quick as lightning slammed it down where the tall blonde was standing a millisecond before. As Naruto jumped to the side, his left flip-flop slipped out from his foot. The axe tore through the flip-flop and the earth. The blade was buried deep inside, the ground itself shaking under the monster's strength. Looking at his favorite flip-flop now in two pieces, Naruto snapped. His hair fell over his face and his eyes gained a dark look. Wasting not a second, he jumped on the shaft of his enemy's weapon and ran up it. As nimble as a cat but with the ferocity of a tiger, he firmly planted his flip-flop-clad right foot into the Minotaur's nose. The large beast was staggered backward by the pure impact of the kick, his head ringing. Not wasting a breath, the ex-Hokage landed on the ground behind his opponent and kicked his meaty legs out from under him. The man-bull smacked to the ground, his head twisting at a weird angle because of his large protruding horn and making him howl in pain yet again. Naruto grabbed the shaft of the blade and pulled on it with all his might. His punctured biceps began bleeding profusely, blood squirting out of the wound freely. Gritting his teeth, his arms suddenly started glowing red and his canines turned unusually sharp. Not even a second later, the blade was ripped out from the earth. Holding it in one hand, he walked towards the Minotaur who still lay on the ground in pain with his twisted head, his single long horn embedded inside the ground, making it nearly impossible for him to move. Standing over him, Naruto took in a deep breath, grinned, and said, "See, I didn't have any beef with you. Until you cut my flip-flop in half." His grin died down and he saw terror in the Minotaur's eyes, "And now, I'll cut you down just like you cut down my favorite slipper." With that, he raised the battle axe above his head and brought it down on the Minotaur, exiling it into depths of Tartarus with a large burst of golden dust in a single swing. "I am not killing any of these ever again. Fucking glitter." That was when around half a dozen armor-clad girls stormed into the little clearing with bronze spears in their hands, led by none other than Sarah. They looked at Naruto in awe and Sarah ran to him and jumped into his arms. Thankfully, she didn't start crying again and kept thanking him. He asked her, "These girls are your campmates, I presume?" Sarah nodded in his arms and said, "I ran and ran until I came across the camp spread out beside the sea. These girls were around its border and soon as I saw them I told me that my friends were in danger and brought them here. A ton of help they were," he said, shaking his head. The girl who seemed the oldest out of the group walked up to him and asked him, her eyes still in awe, "How in the name of Hades did you manage to do that?" Naruto grinned at her and just said, "It part of my charm." He walked to his decapitated flip-flop and slipped the remaining wearable half into his left foot. He'd be damned if he ever let something happen to his flip-flops again. Walking towards the unconscious satyr, he picked him up by the foot and proceeded to drag him to the warrior girls. "Would you pleasant girls mind taking me to whoever runs your camp?" "Oh, and the satyr needs help," the blonde remarked. Still in his arms, Sarah said, "This is the second time he saved us. I am a demigod, and Liam was leading me over here when we got attacked by the scary bullman, and I brought you here to help us out," Sarah explained, and then looked up at Naruto with a smile on her face, but Naruto had already dealt with him. One of the girls said, eyeing Naruto, "Yeah, we saw that." The previous girl spoke up again, "Very well then, follow us. Chiron would want to know about this anyways." Through the woods and up the small hill the girl took him, and soon a wonderful sight met his eyes. He stared across the meadow. There were groves of trees, a winding stream, and acres of strawberries spread out under the blue sky. The valley was surrounded by rolling hills. The landscape was dotted with ancient Greek architecture, an open-air pavilion, an amphitheater, a circular arena. But that they all looked brand new, their white marble columns sparkling in the sun. In a nearby sandpit, a dozen high school-age kids and satyrs played volleyball. Canoes glided across a small lake. Kids in bright orange t-shirts chased each other around a cluster of cabins nestled in the woods. Some shot targets at an archery range. Others rode horses down a wooded trail, and some of their horses had wings. Naruto saw more girls in various types of armor patrolling the borders of the camp, and soon as he came near the borders he could sense some sort of invisible barrier around the perimeter. Even though he had never sensed such a similar barrier before, and the sensation was very faint since the barrier wasn't meant for him as he passed right through it, his heightened senses still picked up on the unusual distortion. Putting it off as a simple protective barrier, he didn't pay much mind to it. As they were walking down the hill towards a large farmhouse, Liam decided to wake up with a large yell, "Aghh! Run, Sarah! Run north to the camp! The Minotaur cannot go inside! Run before!" Naruto had his hoof in his arm and he raised him up to his face and looked at him right in the eye. Not realizing that he was being dragged and alarmed at being picked up into the air by his hoof, Liam screamed, "Ah! Why are you here?" Not a kind way to greet your savior, considering the fact that the said savior has saved you twice, Naruto told him and proceeded to shake his hoof hard, comically making him jiggle mid-air, earning another scream from Liam and giggles from the girls. The girls led the group to the farmhouse, and standing under the porch was a man. A man, with the body of a horse. Naruto was not surprised though. When you grew up amidst people who could spit fire and turn into snakes, with a 1,000-year-old fox for company, you get used to these kinds of things. "Ah, Liam, it is good to see you again." And in such high spirits, Chiron looked at the odd group with a raised eyebrow, paying special attention to Naruto who was dangling him high mid-air. Naruto dropped Liam on the porch softly and Chiron said to him, "I trust you managed to retrieve the girl you identified, judging by her presence here. But you, young man, I have never seen you before. Who might you be?" The half-man half-horse addressed Naruto, but it was Liam who spoke. He told him all about the attack against him and Sarah by the monster that couldn't identify, leaving out the part of him fainting much to the amusement of Naruto. Naruto took a seat at one of the chairs arranged around a short table on one end of the porch as Liam explained everything that had happened with Sarah, laying down the parts of the story where the young satyr wasn't conscious. "Well, I should be thanking you then, Naruto. But you are a human, are you not?" Chiron asked him kindly, to which Naruto nodded. "Well, I wonder, how a human like you managed to defeat two monsters with his bare hands." Chiron looked at the blonde with interest. Naruto fished around for a decent excuse. "I used to learn karate when I was a kid." "Yep, that's why," was the blonde's reply. God, he was terrible at these. He just smiled at the young adult's explanation and thanked the daughters of Ares who had brought them here, who went back to their patrolling duties. He also formally welcomed Sarah and told Liam to take her to the Hermes cabin and show her the introductory film and give her a tour of the camp. "And now that they have left, mind telling me truly how you were exactly able to defeat two monsters, one of them being the feared Minotaur, no less?" Chiron asked, a bit more strictly this time. The blonde proceeded to grab a can of soda from the wooden table and take a large gulp. "This is good stuff," he remarked, before emptying the whole can in one large swig, "and coming back to your question, as I told you, I learnt karate when I was young," he said with a shrug. Chiron did not believe that for a single second, but he saw that the blonde meant no harm. So he decided to ask a different question instead. "I suppose Sarah and Liam filled you in on the divine beings and you're aware of their existence?" "Not until yesterday," he said casually, "but imagine my alarm at finding an ugly winged monster one night terrorizing a girl and a goat boy on the alley outside my house. And that was what led me to find out about these gods that you speak of." Chiron was put off by how calmly the blonde was taking all of this. "The encounter with the monster did not surprise you?" "Well, my ex-girlfriend was equally ugly, so no, not really." Chiron shook his head at the blonde's sense of humor and his ability to dodge questions. He had handled many a hero back in his day. The criteria Naruto fulfilled pretty well, but whether the man in front of him was truly cut out for the hero role remained to be seen. "Very well then. I thank you once again, and request you to keep this knowledge to yourself, for obvious reasons, Chiron told him, deciding to stop with the questions as he realized that Naruto would keep dodging any that were thrown at him. Naruto grunted as if the warning was obvious, which it was. I have no wish to be branded a madman by going around telling people I fought monsters and that Greek gods exist. With that comment, he got up and walked towards a carton full of soda cans. He picked another can up and emptied it in one gulp, before picking up another. This is really good stuff. I hope you don't mind, obviously. Can I take some home? Naruto asked innocently. Chiron smiled again. Sure, this is the least we can do to thank you. The blonde nodded, and picked up the whole carton, leaving with a wave. Chiron groaned loudly in mild irritation at the thought of explaining the disappearance of a whole carton of soda to Dionysus. It had been an amazingly long day for Naruto, he mused to himself as he made his way across the camp. Days with so many plot twists and climaxes were a thing of the past for him now. But he supposed he could get used to them once again, he thought with a shake of his head as he walked towards the large pine tree where the exit was through the Half-Blood Hill. Some dryads at the edge of the woods nearby stared at him with strange looks, and Naruto stared right back. He winked at one, and the wood nymph blushed green. Naruto chuckled and was about to continue when he heard the sharp sound of air being cut. He raised his hand to his face impulsively without wasting a split second and caught the arrow before it could embed itself into his temple. He looked over to the boy who held the bow that had fired the arrow, shaking in fear. He chuckled and walked over to the boy, and asked with a smile, "What did I ever do to you to warrant this assassination attempt?" The young boy who looked to be in his tweens was worried out of his mind. "I am so sorry. I never meant to try and kill you." Naruto laughed again. "Well, you almost succeeded," and with a thought and another chuckle, added, "And Lord, would you have people lining up to thank you if you had." He looked up at the tall man who looked to be quite young. He had never seen him before around the camp. "Are you a new instructor or something?" Naruto just shook his head, and admitted, no. I was just taking a look around, talking to your Chiron about some stuff. Although, he pointed at the boy, you are in desperate need of some instruction before you pop out someone's eye by accident. The kid just smiled sheepishly and bit his tongue. I was knocking the arrow and the string's really right, so I always had to hold it backwards and pull the string with my feet. Naruto looked at him incredulously. You almost killed me and you weren't even shooting the arrow? The kid just grinned. Naruto raised his hands up in the air in a sign of being helpless. Wow. Just wow. Go grab another bow, kid. I'll teach you the method and you can tell the next person who walks through that field that I saved their life. The younger one out of the odd pair smiled brightly and went to grab another bow from the table nearby, which had other archery equipment laid out on it. I'm an Apollo kid, so I'm naturally supposed to be good at archery and stuff. But I suck at it. His smile died down a bit, so everyone makes fun of me. Well, they won't anymore after this, Naruto told him, and then he noticed that the kid was grabbing a bow that was the same size as the previous one he had been wielding. Face palming, he told him, first lesson. When you're using a bow that's as big as you are, you'll obviously end up making a shish kebab out of someone's head unless you can control the draw. Scrunching his eyebrows together, he looked up to the tall blonde. But I've seen some heroes using these huge bows that were twice as big as they were. Those are the Taking a moment to recall the name of the Greek legendary figure, Naruto continued, yep. Those are the Hercules-style muscled freaks who have the strength to draw the string on such a bow. Are you Hercules? The demigod shook his head. Are you muscled? He shook his head again. Exactly. So we start with a small bow. Grab the smallest one you can find. Naruto then grabbed the bow he had dropped on the ground and demonstrated to the boy how to nock the arrow and the firing techniques. He let an arrow fly towards the target. It soared through the air and hit the dead center of the dummy's forehead with a thump. Smiling smugly with satisfaction, he told the kid to let loose as well. He proceeded to do the same, but he only managed to hit the dummy's right arm. He pouted at not being able to hit the dummy's head like the nice man had. You always start out small, kid. You are a quick learner, but you breathe out the moment you let the arrow loose, which messes up your shot. Naruto told the boy, who looked at him with slight surprise before picking up another arrow and trying again. This time, it hit a few centimeters away from where he had been aiming. The kid let out a whoop of joy and thanked the blonde man. Naruto smiled at him, and turned to leave when a voice addressed him. I thought you were leaving? Naruto turned to look at the old centaur, who was smiling. Well, I was planning to, before this kid here almost skewered my head with his arrow. And giving kids who are barely even teenagers arrows that aren't blunted. He said with a dubious expression on his face. Whose brilliant idea was that? Outstanding move. Chiron nodded in agreement, and then said, that's all well and good. But will their enemies and the monsters fire at them with blunted arrows? Yeah? And a lot of good it'll do to them if they themselves kill their friends during training because they sneezed while letting loose. Naruto continued incredulously, and what is the deal with those damned monsters? Chiron gestured the blonde to follow him as he led him towards the exit of Camp Half-Blood. Demigods have a certain smell, or rather an aura to put it better. This is caused by the immortal blood that is a part of their system. That aura can be sensed by the monsters, and which is why demigods are under the constant danger of being attacked by them. Naruto nodded. Immortal blood, you said? So these pipsqueaks live forever? No. The immortal blood is mixed with their own mortal blood and is highly diluted. It doesn't grant them immortality, but yet it is still potent enough that monsters can sense it from long distances. And they aren't under the danger of becoming monster pedigree out here? Chiron laughed lightly at Naruto's way of putting it and said, no, there is a magical barrier that surrounds the place. No monster can enter in from the outside. The retired ninja nodded in understanding, and Chiron decided to try and gauge out a little more information from him since he seemed to have eased up a bit. So, Naruto, that is a strange name. Where are you from? Listen here, old man, or old horse, or whatever you prefer to be called. Chiron would suffice. I hope you don't mind the interruption. Chiron laughed again. He did mind the interruption, but he had a more important point to make. He continued, your obvious attempts at finding out everything about me are very obvious, and quite frustrating as well. Naruto said, looking Chiron in the eye. Oh, you are quite mistaken, Naruto. I am just being curious. A young man such as you knows a lot about warfare. How? Chiron asked politely. You are one stubborn man. Or horse. Or both. Did you hear anything I said a moment ago? The centaur had been getting on his nerves from the moment he started speaking, but now Naruto was seriously annoyed. Chiron laughed heartily, and said, don't worry, Naruto. Even though you seem quite reluctant of company, you are welcome whenever at Camp Half-Blood. You did a good deed by helping the girl and Liam. Would you mind doing a good deed in return? Naruto asked Chiron sweetly. What is it, Naruto? They had reached the little walkway that led out of the camp. Let me leave in peace, thank you. With that, he turned and walked away with a little wave. Chiron could definitely see this boy's presence affecting the flow of things drastically in the future. He smiled again. His smile was wiped off his face when he heard an angry Dionysus, a very angry Dionysus screaming from the big house. Where's all my soda, Chiron? It had been an amazingly long day, reflected Naruto for the second time on the same day as he made his way to his apartment through the 5th Avenue. He looked up to see the wonderful structure known as the Empire State Building. All its lights and its impressive height was a sight to behold. Naruto had a hard time imagining that it was supposed to have a whole mountain above it. Or maybe not such a hard time, after all. He had seen plenty of weirder things during his time. He went over to a nearby cafe and bar that he frequented, sat at the table, and asked for a bourbon. Even though it would take something much stronger and in much larger quantity to have any effect on him, as Kurama's chakra would always render the alcohol useless before it could intoxicate his body, it was no reason to not drink. Long day, Naruto? The bartender asked him. Tell me about it, groaned Naruto, as he put his head down on the table after gulping down his drink, and promptly fell asleep there. The bartender chuckled but did nothing to wake the blonde up, as it was quite the common occurrence. The next time the blonde opened his eyes, he found himself in his friend's house. I had to change shifts, and I couldn't exactly leave you there. His friend smiled at him. Naruto was not surprised though, this was a common occurrence as well. He looked at his watch and saw that it was 3 o'clock in the morning. Now please be so kind as to fuck out of here, and let me sleep in peace. Naruto's friend was arranging his bed, getting ready to sleep. Well, you could have been more discreet about it. A simple goodbye would have sufficed, Ed. Naruto shot him an ugly look, before he got up, grabbed an apple from his Ed's kitchen. Ed shouted at him to not take whatever he was taking, but he ignored him, and left. He was walking towards his home when he heard a loud growl. "Lord, can I catch a damn break?" He groaned internally before making his way towards the source of the sound to find a small boy, backing away from what could be described as a massive canine monster with glowing red eyes and reptilian teeth. "I suppose this is what you call a fucking hellhound," he thought to himself, gritting his teeth. The hellhound turned to look at Naruto, demonstrating that it had a good hearing, or maybe a good sense of smell. The monster snarled at Naruto before he jumped towards him as quick as lightning, fully intent on biting the blonde's head off. The dog was as large as an SUV, but for all the size, it was very agile. Naruto almost had his torso bitten off as he sidestepped just in time. "What am I, a fucking demigod?" he shouted at the overgrown dog who tilted its head as it looked at him, maybe in surprise at being shouted at. "You guys find no place shadier than my alley for your dinner time?" The hellhound looked at him curiously before realizing it was here to hunt and jumped at him. Naruto rolled below the monster past overhead. The hellhound turned around in a flash to see Naruto grabbing a window overhang above his head and climbing on it. The monster tried to jump at him, but Naruto just kept going up, grabbing overhangs and hoisting himself up till he was as high as the third floor. With the hellhound below him barking and roaring, staring right up at him, Naruto filled his fists with the residue gold dust from yesterday that the gargoyle monster had left on there upon its death and threw it at the hellhound. Blinded by the sharp golden particles, the hellhound howled and Naruto got a bit of time to think of something. But not even a second later, he saw the monster baring its teeth in his direction and looking at him with its glowing eyes. In the heat of the moment, Naruto pulled out a chicken bone from somewhere and threw it at a distance on the other end of the alley. The hellhound's natural instincts gave in as it rushed towards the thrown bone, quite like how a pet poodle would go to fetch a thrown stick, its tail wiggling and a happy expression on its face. However, midway it realized it wasn't here for just bones. It was here for some demigod flesh too. And it did not appreciate the intrusion. The hellhound turned around to look at the blonde who had thrown the bone, and snarled at him, baring his vicious teeth. Its eyes seemed to glow a bit brighter, and the pure malice rolling off of the monster coupled along with those scary teeth would have been enough to absolutely frighten a grown man. But Naruto didn't seem even slightly fazed. His eye just twitched in irritation as he jumped down from the overhang, right in front of the monster, and snarled back at the hellhound. Kurama's chakra rushed to his face, making his eyes glow red and enlarging his canines. His whiskers that seemed to be embedded in his cheek grew thicker, and the killing intent that he was releasing on the hellhound caused it to girlishly squeak and unconsciously lower its tail between its hind legs and sit down in an act of submission. The blonde proceeded to go ahead and pet the hellhound on his head, earning him a lick on the hand and wagging of the dog's tail. "Well, it looks like I made a new friend," Naruto cheerfully said before making his way over to the scared boy. He was still scared, but the fact that the man walking towards him managed to beat the monster with just a scream helped. Naruto got to him and extended his arm. They seemed to be almost healed enough for casual use. "What's your name?" The boy took the arm and Naruto pulled him up. Finn. When he saw the hellhound sitting down and wagging its tail, he stepped back a bit as the fear suddenly returned. It could just pounce at him and rip off his whole head in a bite. Naruto noticed his fear and said, "You can pet him, Finn, it's okay." He looked up at the tall man incredulously. He had said, "You can pet him," as casually as someone would tell you to pet their chihuahua. "I am not going anywhere, that thing," he shouted. Naruto just shook his head and lightly pushed him at the sitting monster. Finn's breath caught in his throat as he stumbled right towards the hellhound. It opened its mouth out wide and time seemed to slow down as the boy made peace with his maker. But instead of getting his torso ripped out, he got a lick on the face. The hellhound's tongue was huge and it drenched him completely, and the smell of his mouth made him faint. Naruto facepalmed and picked him up in his arms, and walked over to his apartment, his new friend following behind him, seemingly docile. "You need some damn Colgate." As his head hit the top of the doorframe with a loud bang, Finn woke up. "Ouch!" Naruto exclaimed, and then noticed Finn had returned to consciousness, and said cheerfully, "Welcome back to the world of the living." Dumping the child on his bed and making him bounce and grin, he asked, "Well, Finn, do you know who your parents were?" Even though he was asking, he was still pretty sure that the kid had no idea. "I am an orphan. I never knew them," the scared boy muttered. Naruto sighed knowingly, so you're one of them demigods too? Expecting a nod of the head, he was surprised when Finn just scrunched up his face, what? Naruto figured that he had no idea and that it would be best if he was to take him to Camp Half-Blood. He decided that it would be best if Chiron was to explain about him being a demigod, since the centaur would do it quite better than he himself. He nodded and just told Finn to never mind and sleep. He turned around after tucking the kid in, only to notice that the hellhound had followed him into the house and room, its mouth open and its tongue rolled out carelessly. He proceeded to his fridge and chucked a large portion of pork that he found at the hellhound, who happily started munching away. Finn thankfully didn't notice from under the sheets. It wouldn't be healthy for the kid to faint twice in a span of 2 minutes. When Finn got up the next day, he was shown the way to the bathroom where he freshened up and came out to see Naruto all readied up. Wearing a dark gray Henley t-shirt under a lightweight denim jacket and simple form-fitting jeans, he seemed as if he was going out somewhere. "Do you know why that monster attacked you the previous night, Finn?" Naruto asked him as he handed him a simple cheese sandwich. The kid took a bite and seemed to like it. "Nope. I've been attacked by such monsters before as well. It's not common, but it isn't rare either." Soon he chomped down the whole thing and asked for more. After being handed another sandwich, he continued, "Somehow, no one else seems to notice them. Like that time when our orphanage went on a little trip to the Metropolitan Museum and these weird metal donkey-legged ladies with flaming hair tried to suck my blood. And that time when we went to the Brooklyn Bridge and this lion-snake monster tried to eat me." Finn looked up at Naruto, expecting the blonde to start laughing at him any second because he thought he was lying. But his protector just nodded in understanding. "You know, Finn, I know of a perfect place for kids who are just like you. You would make a lot of friends over there, and also learn how to protect yourself. Would you like me to take you there?" the blonde asked the young boy. He was reluctant at first, but he knew he could trust the blonde. He had saved him after all. And that was how Naruto found himself walking through Half-Blood Hill the next morning. The summer sun was blazing, illuminating the valley on which the Camp Half-Blood spread out. Teenagers and a few kids could be seen going on about their jobs or playing around. Demigods were practicing archery and sword fighting, and some could also be seen trying to scale a wall while lava spurted all around them. "Close your mouth, Finn. An insect might find it interesting and fly in." Finn shut his mouth abruptly, but nothing could make him shut his widened eyes. He looked on in amazement at the camp spread out on the valley, and the unique style of architecture of the buildings. He was horrified and amazed at the same time, when he saw a kid scramble up the wall while hot boiling lava poured around him. He looked at kids fighting each other with swords glinting in the sun, and saw kids using bows to shoot arrows at dummies. Accompanying Finn was a tall blonde with a very large dog by his side. And the dog was not a normal dog. It was a hellhound from the depths of the underworld. He occasionally licked the blonde's elbow, and wetted his sleeve with his saliva, much to his annoyance. When he did it once more, Naruto shouted in annoyance, "You're doing it just to irritate me, aren't you?" The hellhound tilted his head, and just wagged his tail. "I knew it. No more treats for the day." Naruto huffed in annoyance. The hellhound started looking at him, with large teary eyes, and his tail stopped wagging and drooped. Naruto knew that if he looked at the hellhound, his resolve would crumble. How does a hellhound manage to pull off the infamous puppy dog eyes anyway? Thankfully, Finn decided to pull him out of his misery. Are all of these kids just like me?" Finn looked up at the blonde man who had brought him here, with the promise of a home. Naruto looked down at him and spoke, "Yes, one of their parents was a god or a goddess. So, who was my father or mother? I really hope my father is Zeus. He is so cool. I saw him in a movie. He appeared in a flash of lightning and started shocking everyone around." Boom, wham. The child imitated explosions with his hand as he spoke, and jumped around. Naruto smiled at his innocence, and grabbed his hand, to lead him towards the camp, not too far away now. "It might be possible, Finn. And then in no time, you would be appearing in flashes of lighting and shocking monsters here and there too." "Wow, really?" He had to look up when he was talking to Naruto, because he was very tall. "Yes, Finn. Nothing is impossible if you are dedicated." What he was saying was interrupted by a bark from his hellhound companion. "Oh come on Sasuke, didn't I tell you? It is rude to interrupt when two people are talking." He looked at his pet and scolded him. And yes, he had named his hellhound Sasuke. Something about naming his dog after his now dead brother like friend sounded like such an amusing and intriguing concept to the blonde that he went right ahead and did it. He sure hoped that it riled his former teammate up, wherever he was now. Sasuke barked again. Something about that line made the blonde guffaw. He then looked at his pet, and saw that something was stopping him from moving ahead for some reason. Some kind of an invisible wall. Ah, the barrier I sensed earlier. It doesn't allow monsters to enter. It would seem that you can't enter Sasuke. It's all right. You can go back to my house, and no going near the refrigerator again. Sasuke looked sad, but he trotted over to the nearest shadow, under a tree, and sank in it. Naruto and Finn continued the rest of their walk through the valley, Finn still going on about how Poseidon for a dad would be cool too, as he would then be able to talk to fish, and Naruto smiling at him. The blonde then gestured to a large farmhouse in front of him, and said, "And that is where you will meet your teacher, Chiron. Come on." Naruto walked up to the porch, except he did not find Chiron there. Instead, sitting on a wooden chair near a card table, was a small porky man. He had a red nose, big watery eyes, and curly hair so black it was almost purple. He wore a tiger-patterned Hawaiian shirt, and had bloodshot eyes. He looked up at the tall blonde in front of him, and the young boy holding his arm. A staring match took place between the blonde and the short man, neither of them backing down. Eventually, curiosity got the better of him though, and he asked Naruto, "Who are you? You don't look like a camper." "Not that I would remember if you were." "No, I am not a demigod, if that is what you mean." "Where is Chiron?" Naruto asked him. To be honest, this blonde riled Dionysus up. He walks in the camp casually like he owns the place, and proceeds to stare at him so rudely. "Him, a god? What is your business with Chiron, mortal?" Dionysus asked, with a raised eyebrow. "Who are you?" To be honest, this porky man riled Naruto up. Something about him just tickled him the wrong way. A question is not answered with another question. Dionysus wasn't used to being talked to like this. "It is when I wanted to." "Now, who are you?" Naruto could see that he was getting on his nerves, and he was immensely enjoying it as well. "You want to know who I am?" Dionysus got up from his chair, walked up to the blonde. "I am Dionysus, the god of madness and wine." Every word was spoken with much emphasis. Dionysus expected the disrespectful blonde to back off, apologize, or even shout in disbelief. He never expected him to start laughing. "What is so funny, pray tell me?" Dionysus asked with clenched teeth. The blonde chuckled again, and said, "Ah, that explains the smell." Dionysus had enough disrespect for one day. He decided he would teach the boy some respect. He stared into the blue eyes of the blonde, that were glinting in the light, and showed him the worst of visions. Visions of gruesome deaths, and people descending into insanity. It would have been enough to knock a full-grown man down on the ground. But the blonde laughed yet again. "That the best you can think of?" And suddenly, he saw the blonde's eyes flash red, before Dionysus found himself in a desert, dying from thirst. A goblet of wine a foot in front of him, but when he reached out to grab it, the goblet kept getting away from him farther and farther. Then he found himself drowning in the same goblet of wine. Then he found himself going insane, ripping his own fingers off. He then found himself wrapped in thorny vines, bleeding from having a million thorns pricking him. Then, he found himself giving birth to a huge grape, thrice as large as a normal football. He then found himself being raped, by the very same thorny vines that were all around him a moment before. All of this, and more, in the span of a mere second. When he was pulled out of the vision, he fell to his knees. The visions that he had just seen, they were vivid. They seemed as real as the air that he was thankfully breathing right now. They had scared the shit out of Dionysus. Dionysus had been scared before. It was nothing new to him. His father, Zeus, scared him. Some of the monsters that were stuck into the Tartarus for eternity scared him. Some monsters that weren't in the Tartarus scared him even more. But for the first time, in 1,000 years, Dionysus realized what it felt like to have your life in danger. What it felt like to be a step away from dying. What it felt like, to be truly afraid. He turned, to look at the blonde, sitting on his chair, sipping on his can of strawberry soda. "Who are you?" he asked, still on the ground. "Oh, just your common mere mortal," was his reply. Dionysus got up, and realized that he was cold when a light breeze flew past him. He was sweaty, and his tiger-patterned shirt was soaked. Now, Dionysus, god of wine and madness, I hope we can be friends. Naruto said with a sweet smile. Finn looked on to what had taken place before his eyes in shock and awe. They had reached the porch to find a man sitting on a chair. Naruto and the man, who called himself Dionysus, had a borderline argument kind of talk, and Dionysus proceeded to get up and walk to the much taller blonde and look him in the eye. And then he just fell on his knees. Just like that, Finn knew that Naruto had done something. He did not know what, but he knew that he had. The tension in the air was thick, and it was broken by Chiron, who trotted up to the two men and one boy in his centaur form. Finn looked at him with eyes that were so wide, they looked like dinner plates. Chiron smiled when he looked at Naruto, and glanced at Dionysus, who was strangely sweating. He looked like he was about to say something, before Naruto interrupted him. Save it, old centaur. I found the kid, I brought him here. Now, I will leave, thank you very much. Naruto was about to get up, when Chiron asked him to stay. Before he could reply, Chiron called one of the campers, and told her to take Finn, and show him the orientation film. He then looked at the blonde, for an explanation he supposed. An orphan. Found him in an alley. If I had been a second late, he would not have made it here. Naruto said, after Finn was gone. Life for demigods is hard, Naruto. And people like you can help them. I understand if you don't want to, and I thank you, for saving yet another child. Having the blonde helping the keeper satyrs in finding demigods around the world would be a major help. And Naruto had proved that he was capable of handling himself. His musings were interrupted by Dionysus, who sounded especially displeased today. It seems like you have found quite the interesting specimen, Chiron. He looked at Naruto while saying this. Naruto winked at him, and smiled, surely not all that interesting. I am just a mortal, after all. With this he got up, and started walking away. If you ever change your mind, Naruto, about helping these demigods, you're always welcome here. He nodded at Chiron's words, before a feminine squeal of joy erupted from near his chest, where a very happy Sarah had jumped onto. Hi Naruto, she said cheerfully. Oof, Sarah, don't you have somewhere else to be? Go train or something. I was leaving anyway, he said as he continued to walk towards the large pine tree, where the exit was. But I have so much to tell you. Do you know, I am a daughter of Aphrodite. One night when everyone was eating at the bonfire I suddenly started glowing. Then everyone bowed down and they had me move into the Aphrodite cabin. I made some friends at the Hermes cabin, but the Aphrodite cabin is so much better. It's so pink, it's almost like a dollhouse, she said happily. Naruto couldn't help but smile at the child's innocence. So did you make any friends at the Aphrodite cabin? Yes, everyone there is so nice and amazing, and just like me. He supposed that was to be expected, since they had the same mother. Naruto liked what the camp was doing for these children. Displaced godly children with nowhere to go, could come here and find a family for themselves. As Sarah had, and as he supposed Finn would as well. Despite his claims that he didn't care about all this, he still felt somehow responsible for these kids' safety and their happiness. And so, he would continue to help any kids he would come across. Any and all. He would protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He was starting to resemble his older self much more now, he mused to himself. Careful now, you don't want them to know you're all caring and plushy inside. A deep, gruff voice resonated from somewhere deep within his psyche. Oh, he speaks. The mighty Kitsune-sama. You ought to have more respect for the Kitsune-sama. I could still blast your behind all the way to Konoha, kid. Ha, don't be so sure bud. You never know after all, he replied, within his mind, and when are you going to stop calling me a kid? I was the cage of the strongest hidden village, you ought to be the one with more respect. The same village I leveled down to the ground with a flick of my tail. The gruff voice responded lazily. And got sealed into a kid who hadn't even grown teeth yet. Naruto guffawed. And still and Kami knows how much I hate that kid. Ah, I love you too furball. HMPH. Was all he got in return. Kurama was still inside him, although it was more a matter of choice rather than a matter of a large metal gate with bars and a paper restricting his exit. And Naruto was duly grateful for the company of the fox. He would have lost it a long time ago otherwise. Naruto had had him since his birth now, and how amusingly long ago that had been. As the last remnants of their age, or rather, Naruto's age, since Kurama had been quite old when he was sealed, It was natural for them to stick together. Two overpowered beings, equally displaced, and lost of age and time and home. It was natural that one of them preferred living inside the mind of the other, and sleep his days away. They weren't just lost of age and home though, they had no purpose. They hadn't had one for a long time now. So Kurama supposed it was natural of the blonde to manage to find himself helping sons and daughters of gods and fighting monsters, since he always had a profound knack for getting himself into things he shouldn't have. It was all natural. Their musings were interrupted by a question from the little girl, still in his arms. "What was that, Sarah? I didn't listen to what you said." Naruto asked her. "I asked if you would please stay for the night. They have a bonfire and we sing songs, and anything that you want to eat appears on the tables." Sarah spoke quickly, hoping the blonde would agree. He thought about it for a moment. Or at least he pretended to, because he supposed it would hurt the girl's feelings if he said no outright. "No Sarah, I have work to do, college and all." He lied obviously. All the work that he had planned on doing was falling asleep on his bed in his own apartment. Sarah pouted and said, "I'll not let you go." With a determined look on her face, and grabbed onto his head, pulled herself upward, and sat on his neck. "I won't get off until you promise me that you'll stay. Stop wiggling around on me. I'm ticklish." Soon as he said that, he regretted it. Sarah started tickling his neck furiously, and Naruto had enough. He grabbed her from his neck, lifted the now struggling girl, and placed her on the nearest tree branch as she tried punching and kicking him, but her hands and legs were too short. "You're so mean." With that, she started crying. Naruto stared at the girl. With a sigh, he picked her back from the tree branch, placed her on his neck, and started walking back towards the camp. "Point me to wherever your dining area is," he said with another sigh. She squealed happily and pointed him towards the pavilion. The sun had set, and the full moon was completely visible, illuminating the spread-out land and its buildings beautifully. It seemed brighter than usual today, Naruto mused to himself. A few kids were already at their tables, and more were coming in. Chiron and Dionysus sat at a smaller table, set horizontal to all the other tables that were arranged in rows. A few hundred kids, a centaur, a god, good food, and a brighter moon. What could go wrong? Naruto was dining with Chiron and Dionysus, chomping on some grapes. "They taste tastier, is it because you're the god of grapes?" Naruto looked towards Dionysus, his mouth full of grapes. Dionysus tried not to get irritated, but it seemed like the blonde had made it his dearest ambition to annoy the hell out of him since the moment he stepped in the camp's borders. God of grapes, wine, vine and madness. Don't miss out on the last bit. Why Diet Coke when you're the god of wine? Dionysus groaned. Chiron smiled. He has been forbidden from consuming any alcohol by his father, Naruto. It is a part of his punishment. Naruto proceeded to pull out a bottle of Petrus from somewhere, pop off the cap, and start chugging it down. Chiron looked at the bottle appreciatively. "Is that a bottle of the Pomerol Petrus?" "Yes, $3,000 a bottle, old man." "Oh, Dionysus, you want some?" he asked innocently. Dionysus' bloodshot eyes looked even more bloodshot, so bloodshot that his whole eye except the iris seemed to have gone red. "Oh, you look quite drunk already. Should I tell your daddy on you?" Dionysus' eyes looked like they would pop any second, and Chiron looked alarmed. Naruto had gone too far. And that was the moment the hunters of Artemis chose to arrive, led by Artemis herself. She walked into the camp, leading all her hunters. "Ah, Lady Artemis, we are honored," Chiron said as all the demigods kneeled. Dionysus regarded her with a nod, his anger at Naruto mostly forgotten, because it was beneath him to use his powers on a mere mortal, and it probably was also because of the fact that said powers did not seem to work on said mortal. But it was mostly because of the former. But Naruto had no idea what to do if you found yourself in the presence of a goddess. In his previous encounters with goddess, they generally tended to be excessively violent, with horns and super powerful red eyes on their foreheads. They certainly did not come in the appearance of 11-year-old girls. Every camper bowed, and so did Chiron. Even Dionysus regarded her with a careful nod. But Naruto kept sitting there, chugging down his bottle of $3,000 wine. Zoe Nightshade was furious, to say in the least. She had never seen the man before. But this is why she hated men. No respect whatsoever, and throw a couple horrible habits in there, namely drinking and whoring, and there you have it, a man. Bow, before the great Lady Artemis. It is a disrespect that you even laid your disgusting eyes on her." Zoe would have said something to the blonde, but one of the other hunters beat her to it. And yet, the man did not seem to care. He kept drinking, and they kept looking at him. Artemis, with an unreadable expression that could mean anything. Her hunters in barely suppressed rage at this disrespect, Chiron with wary eyes, Dionysus with amusement and the campers in horror. Once he was done drinking the entire bottle, he calmly set it on his table. Then he looked at the hunter who had spoken. And he said, "What did you say? I couldn't quite catch that, I am sorry." Zoe repeated what the hunter had said, with much more visible display of barely controlled anger. "Oh, you're suggesting that I was checking out this 11-year-old girl? Sorry to disappoint you ladies, but I'm no pedophile." Zoe gripped her bow so hard it would have broken if it wasn't magical. "Bow," she said, her teeth clenched. "How about, let me think, no." If she gripped her bow any harder, it was going to break, magical or not. "Do you have any idea who you are speaking to?" She spoke so loudly that even the tree nymphs watching scurried back to their trees. "No, which is precisely the reason I am not bowing right now," Naruto said casually. Zoe was going to lunge at him, but her mistress stopped her before she could put an arrow up this disrespectful man's rear. "He is just ignorant, Zoe, he is too simple to understand. But it would be good to learn some respect, boy. It might even save your life someday." Artemis spoke. Her voice was a young girl's, but it carried so much authority that it made the hair on the legs of satyrs 150 feet away stand. "The only thing that saves my life is my blade. And if you don't learn to respect, you'll need it often. And it will not hold out every time. You never know, it might," he said with a strange smile and a wink. Artemis had enough of this nonsense. She supposed it would be fun to see him speak so much as a jackalope, but she fought the temptation. "My hunters are tired, Chiron. We've been on the trail of a monster from all the way to Kansas. Have them accommodated at my cabin." Chiron had already risen, and he said, "Yes, Lady Artemis." He then called forward a girl of the Athena cabin to lead to the Artemis cabin. The campers were still on their knees. They had been sure that the tall blonde guy who seemed just a slightly older than they were would go off bounding into the forest as a jackalope, but it did not happen. Chiron sent them off as well, and they scuttered to their cabins, with the memory of a man who had chugged a whole bottle of wine, right in front of Artemis, and then had the nerve to argue with her, and her hunters, and still wasn't a jackalope. Artemis spoke to Chiron again after the campers and the hunters had left. "We shall leave tomorrow at dusk. This monster is unlike any other I have faced in the few previous centuries. This doesn't bode well for Olympus, Chiron." Chiron nodded gravely. "I shall send information to the hunters if I acquire any, my lady." "Good." With that, and a glare in Naruto's direction, she walked back into the trees from which she had emerged from with the hunters. That was Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, wilderness, archery and the moon. She is known for her hate she harbors towards the male gender, Naruto. Chiron told the blonde, who was drinking another bottle of wine now. "Lucky for you, you aren't a jackalope yet. Try to pull a few more of these stunts, and do us all a favor and become one," Dionysus said with distaste. "Perhaps then you would be a little less bothersome." Naruto was offered a room in the big house to sleep for the night, but he declined, saying that he'd find a place, but he wanted to look around first, and with that, he had left. The next morning, a few Hermes kids who were tasked with cleaning the stables because of their cabin's -2 marks in cleanliness found a blond man sleeping soundly, using a pile of hay as a blanket. They recognized him from the previous night, the guy who'd annoyed Artemis and still lived. He was quite their role model now. But still, that wouldn't stop them from trying to rob him. When the Hermes kids who had been tasked with cleaning the stables didn't return till it was noon, there was a major panic. The Hermes campers decided to look everywhere but the stables. Then some Athena cabin kid told them to go look in the stables first. And that was where they found a blond man sleeping soundly, using a hay pile as a blanket. Beside him lay the 3 Hermes kids who were on cleaning duty. One of them had a black eye, the other had a swollen nose, and the other had a big welt on his forehead. All 3 of them were out cold. Deciding better than trying to rob him, they went to Chiron, who shook his head. Things were going to change quite a lot with the blonde around. He could feel it in his horse bones. Naruto woke up with a horrible itch. He made a mental note to not sleep in horse stables and use hay piles as blankets again in the future. He really wanted one of those winged horses, but he felt that Chiron and the gods wouldn't appreciate it too much if he just flew off with one. He had a vague memory of 3 kids trying to rob him. He hoped he hadn't accidentally killed them. That would be quite a problem. He got up, looked around himself. Hay and horses and their dung. No sign of the 3 kids that he had knocked out, or maybe, but hopefully not killed. He started walking towards the big house. He figured that he had already stayed too long, and he had already gotten on the bad side of 2 gods, which was 2 more than he wanted the number to be. Not that he hadn't immensely enjoyed it. He crossed the armory and the forge on his way. There were white marble columns lining walls stained with soot. Chimneys on the roof pumped smoke over a gable with carvings of gods and monsters. Machinery working, fires crackling, and the sound of hammers against metal could be clearly heard. A few dozen yards in front of the forge was the armory. It was essentially just a large metal shed around the side of Athena's cabin. The armory was very crowded for some reason. He looked at the strange metals the various weapons seemed to be made of. He walked towards a sword suspended on a wall, with a description etched below where it hung. Endeshi. The sword gifted to the mortal Genghis Khan by Zeus. It was a beautiful blade. It had a dark blade, which had a slight curve. The blade was well balanced. Naruto ran his index finger on the edge of the blade. It had been the lightest of touches, but sure enough, there was now a cut on his finger. Blood trickled down his finger. The cut healed as quickly as it had been made, and the skin stitched itself. That sword has never been used. It was gifted to Genghis Khan, but he preferred his own blade. Zeus was furious, and his refusal led to his death. An African-American boy around the age of 12 or 13 told him. He was buff for his age, and his hands were calloused, and the smell of the forges clung to him like perfume. Fun guy, this Zeus. Who are you, kid? Naruto stopped his examination of the blade and looked at the kid. Charles Beckendorf, from the Hephaestus cabin. The kid replied, "Why is the armory so crowded, Charles? And why are they all wearing armor? You guys look way too young for going off to a war," he remarked, staring at a 9-year-old with armor. It was way too big for the poor kid, and way too heavy. His helm covered his whole face. "It's because we have captured the flag in half an hour. They're getting ready for that," Charles told the tall man. "Capture the flag?" Naruto inquired. "Yes." "Oh, you're the new guy at camp," Charles said, as if he had just realized it. "I saw you bring that kid from the Aphrodite cabin, and that boy from Apollo cabin. We play capture the flag in the woods. Usually it is cabins against other cabins, but whenever the hunters arrive, all of us unite against them. They're really hard to beat." "Sounds fun. Does this sword belong to anyone as of right now?" he asked, gesturing to the sword on the wall. "No, it doesn't," he told him. Naruto proceeded to pluck the sword off the wall, muttered a thanks to the boy, and continued his way towards the big house. You disrespectful man," a female voice snarled at him as he turned around to look at its source. It was the girl from the other night. She had dark brown eyes, a slightly upturned nose, copper-colored skin, and the silver circlet braided into the top of her long, dark hair. She walked up to Blonde gracefully, but the anger was evident. She had said the word man like it was some kind of a horrible disease. "Oh, you share the same hate towards men as your mistress does, Naruto asked, amused. "I will wipe that smile right off thy face." She looked murderous. "You could try." And the huntress was about to lunge at him, but Chiron's voice stopped her. "Perhaps you'll get the chance. How about you participate and capture the flag with the campers, Naruto?" It was the perfect plan. Chiron knew that if he had allowed Zoe to attack Naruto, the kid would have left with her whole quiver used on him. By making Naruto participate, he could avoid a riot on his hands, since the Aphrodite kids looked just as angry as Zoe was. It would also present the perfect opportunity for Chiron to assess the mysterious blonde's skills. At least that is what he had in mind, until the blonde refused. "Too much work, old man. I'd rather do anything else really, that doesn't involve me making the effort to move." "Ah, there goes my perfect plan. And I see you carrying the Endeshi. It is a cursed sword, Naruto, cursed by Zeus himself. It can kill with a single cut when used on the owner of the blade. That is how Genghis Khan died. When he refused the blade, Zeus cursed it, and it was the same blade that took his life with just a nick on his earlobe. Was he trying to get an ear piercing? Someone should have told the guy that you generally use needles for that sort of thing. Naruto remarked. And since you were the first person to touch the blade after Genghis Khan's death, its ownership belongs to you now. What a cursed super deadly sword was doing on a wall with 24 ADHD kids in the same room, he would never know. But have no worries, dear centaur. It seems the sword has grown old. He looked at the blood on his finger, from the cut by the sword. It seemed the sword liked him too much to kill him. Kirin did not understand what Naruto meant, but he did not get time to question. He never noticed the blood on his finger. Zoe spoke up yet again. Why aren't thou taking part? Too scared to face the hunters in battle? How manly of thee. On second thought, Kirin, sign me up for this capture the flag thingy. The demigods had been gathered up on one edge of the forest, while the hunters occupied the other. They were the red team, led by Zoe, occupying the east side of the Zephyros Creek, which ran through the middle of the woods. The blue team, consisting of all the campers participating, were spread out on the west side of the creek. A young blue-eyed sandy blonde-haired boy, a son of Hermes, led them. He commanded demigods to cover various positions and discussed plans with other cabin's counselors. The boy looked to be around 16 or 17. Luke was running out of demigods to man the northern edge of their territory. He had carefully spread out all campers at his disposal, with the advice of the Athena cabin counselor. He knew that the hunters would go for an all-out assault focused on a particular region because of their lesser numbers. But should they choose to invade from the northernmost edge, they would surely lose their flag because of their weak defenses in the region. Then suddenly, his eyes fell on the blonde-haired guy who had rescued a few kids and brought them to the camp, the one who had argued with Artemis. He seemed as if he was going to be participating as well. Are you a demigod? He threw a question at the blonde. He looked at the sandy-haired boy who had asked him the question. No. Okay, are you playing too or what? Yes, I am. Great. Could you hold the northern part of the... No. Luke was surprised. Listen, we don't have a lot of people in the region. If the hunters invade from there, they will get the flag for sure. He tried to make the blonde who looked just a couple years older than him understand. They won't, Naruto said, and started walking at the edge of a river. He walked for a couple minutes, stopped, and said, they'll invade from right here. And I suppose they told you this so you could win easily? Luke asked him, the sarcasm evident in his voice. Obviously, he winked at him. Who can say no to this handsome face? Luke face-palmed. He told him, see man, this might be your first capture the flag, but this isn't a joke. Who said the game is a joke? You being captain is the joke. Luke groaned. He had no idea what to say to make the blonde listen. He got ready to pounce into the enemy territory soon as the match was about to start. And when it did, the blonde turned out to be right. The hunters invaded from exactly the spot Naruto had been standing on. Zoe Nightshade came in like storm. Arrows flew here and there, and campers fell everywhere. The arrows weren't aimed to kill, just disable. There were arrows that released nets and there were arrows that caused minor explosions. There were arrows with blunted edges that could give you quite the bruise. And then there were arrows that released fart gas, earning quite a few gagging sounds from campers unfortunate enough to be the victim. Luke had spread his demigods too thin. Backups were too far away, and the ones closest had already fallen. Victory was clear for Zoe and her hunters, as the flag was clearly in her view 100 yards away. As she walked towards the flag, a voice rang out from the tree above her. You're pretty good with that bow. And there he was, with his eyes closed, with one of his legs hanging down, laid out on a branch of the tree. Zoe had been searching for the blonde from the moment she entered the enemy territory. She had never been aiming for the flag. Her target was the disrespectful blonde. As soon as she caught sight of him, her hand flew to the arrows in her quiver. Quick as lightning, she pulled out an arrow with a blunted edge and knocked it, and let it fly. But as soon as she released her index and thumb fingers and the arrow flew, the blonde jumped from his branch to another one, quicker than she would have believed. Or not as good as I initially thought, he said, as the arrow thudded where he had been lying a moment before. Zoe let another arrow fly and the blonde jumped to another branch. She gritted her teeth and started firing in rapid succession. Her hands were a blur, as she pulled out arrows from her quiver, knocked them and let loose. A short while later, her last arrow was let loose, and her last arrow missed as well, as the blonde jumped onto another branch. Not one arrow had so much as grazed him. He finally jumped down with a chuckle, and pulled out his cursed blade, the Endashi. Time to test this blade's edge. Zoe pulled out 2 hunting knives, and as soon as his feet touched the ground, and lunged at him. She slashed horizontally with her knife, which should have left a 3-inch cut on the much taller blonde's chest. But the blonde stepped back just as the blade was about to make contact. Zoe used her other knife to slash down vertically, but the blonde stepped back again. Her next strike was stopped by Naruto's dark blade. So was the one after that. And the one after that. She slashed at him like a lunatic and he intercepted every strike with Endashi, the hunters looking on in surprise and awe, too scared to let loose an arrow, fearing that they might accidentally hit Zoe. This went on for a couple of minutes, before Zoe jumped away to make some distance between them. "You're quite good with those knives too," he said with a smile, a taunting one. Zoe would have said something, but she was out of breath. She had hunted by Artemis's side for thousands of years, but not a lot of monsters her managed to survive the onslaught of her knives, assuming they survived her volley of arrows first. But this Naruto, who claimed to be a simple mortal, had. He couldn't be just a simple human. No simple mortal human could fight with that level of agility and dexterity. "Oh, won't you give it another whirl?" he asked with that irritating smile of his, as he walked closer to her. She feinted with her right hand, and stopped at midair to attack with her left. It was a basic move, and the blonde intercepted it, as she had expected he would. She then proceeded to thrust herself upwards in the air and throw both her knives at the blonde. An unorthodox move, but the blonde deflected both the knives with a single flick of his sword. Zoe looked stunned. "An unorthodox move, and unwise since you're unarmed now." The blonde's tone sounded disappointed, as if he had expected better from her. Then Zoe proceeded to pull out a spare knife from her boots, and threw it at the blonde in one smooth gesture. It was so quick that inexperienced hunters and campers didn't even notice her do it. Zoe was sure that the attack would get the annoying blonde man. The feint had just been a distraction, and the jumping and throwing of the knife was a move to make the blonde believe that she had thrown the last weapons in her possession. Then she had made a show of looking stunned. She had expected that his guard would be dropped, since he believed that she was out of weapons to use. And as he dropped his guard, she would throw the knife hidden in her boot, and it would impale itself into the blonde. Or it would have, if he hadn't deflected that too. "Oh, I knew that you had one hidden up in your boot," he said with a smile and a wink. "I said you were unarmed to make you believe that I believed you were unarmed." That was the moment when a loud cheer erupted close by. Luke had returned with the red flag. Hearing their cheer, the other campers started cheering too. They knew that the game had been won. The hunters were frozen in their spots, in surprise of the fight that had just taken place and in anger that they had lost. Zoe was stunned, and for real this time. She stood still looking at the back of the blonde who was walking away to the big house, out of breath and tired, knowing the fact that she had just lost. Unknown to the hunters and the campers, Artemis had watched the whole battle take place. When Zoe had charged into the enemy territory with half a dozen hunters and had disabled all the campers in the region with arrows, she had been sure that victory would be theirs. But that was before Naruto had spoken out from the branch of that tree. He had never once attacked, but just had delayed Zoe enough for the campers to capture their flag. "Just who is this man? Quite the epitome of show-off you are." Kurama spoke in his mind. But you can't deny that the look on the girl's face wasn't worth it. And they both laughed, fox and man. No, I can't." Naruto was aware that the weird child goddess had been watching the whole thing take place. That was one of the reasons why he hadn't attacked and just relied on defense. He did not want these Olympians discovering about him just yet. He had lived long enough in isolation, without any gods and goddesses to worry about, and he preferred it that way. So he had just displayed the bare minimum of the skills he possessed, just enough necessary to deflect every attack the girl would throw at him. But just that much seemed quite enough to put the goddess of the moon and Chiron on edge, if the expressions on their faces were any indication. "Karate training?" Chiron asked him. "You got that right," Naruto replied with a smile. Chiron sighed. Getting the strangely skilled blonde to talk would be near impossible unless he wanted to himself. It didn't take long for the campers to notice the blonde who seemed to be silently trying to sneak off somewhere. Neither did it take long for them to rush up to him and lift him up on their shoulders, screaming and laughing. Naruto's irritated groan did not matter. The campers had finally won against the campers after a losing streak 3 decades long. Soon, the campers rushed off to the amphitheater for their nightly sing-along. The fire in the amphitheater burned bright and 30 feet tall, reflecting the excessively joyous mood of the campers. It seemed like if the hunters had been seated in the amphitheater instead of the campers, the fire wouldn't have burned at all. The gloom in their midst was noticeable, but the campers didn't care. They happily sang a song about how their grandma fought like a demon. Luke walked up to Naruto. "Good game, man," he said, and held out a s'more from a tray for the blonde. He smiled and took the whole tray from him. "By the way, how did you know that they were going to invade from that spot?" Luke asked him. "Oh, I told you already, they told me that." He smiled. Luke sighed and knew it would be useless trying to get the blonde to speak. He sat beside him. "So to what do I owe the pleasure of your company?" Naruto asked, looking at the flames that burned even higher now. "Who are you? I heard about your fight with Zoe Nightshade. She has a reputation for being the most dangerous hunter of Artemis. How did you survive? You say that you are not a demigod, but how can a simple human accomplish such a feat?" Naruto turned his head sideways to look at him. He looked at him right in the eye with a small smile, and said, "You'd be surprised by what a simple human can achieve." Naruto looked back at the flames. "Just because you are the children of gods or have their blessings, you guys think you are so high and mighty. You look down on humans. You look down on their simplicity. You underestimate them, and that is what leads to your fall." The flames of the campfire illuminated the young blonde's face in a strange, eerie way. "The gods fight their fights and scheme their schemes up in heaven. The monsters fight their fights and scheme their schemes down in this Tartarus that your Chiron spoke of. And you demigods fight off monsters. Sometimes you kill them, sometimes they kill you. Nevertheless, stuck between all of this, humanity continues to survive. They continue to endure in their rotten world. We continue to endure. So, an advice to you from a simple human, Luke Castellan, never underestimate the power of simplicity and the strength of humanity." And in that moment, while they were seated beneath the flames of their campfire, this blonde did not look quite as young. "Not heaven, Olympus." Naruto looked at Luke. "What did you say?" "You said the gods scheme their schemes in heaven. They don't live up in heaven. They live on Mount Olympus. Heaven is actually down in the underworld." Naruto groaned. "Okay, can you all stop systematically picking my beliefs apart?" Luke smiled, which soon turned into a full-blown laughter. Naruto smiled too, and the flames seemed to burn a tad bit brighter than it had before. The next morning, seeing Luke's bravery in capture the flag game against the hunter, Chiron finally agreed to give him a quest at the request of Hermes. A quest to retrieve a golden apple from the Garden of Hesperides. Luke couldn't have looked any more happier. "What does this golden apple do anyway?" Naruto asked, as he walked in the deck of the big house, where Chiron was talking to Luke, giving him tips and answering his questions, since it was his first quest ever. It doesn't actually do anything. The quest itself is an honor, which is enough," Luke told him. "But didn't Hercules do the same thing? What is the point in repeating history and doing deeds already done by others?" Naruto said as he sat down onto one of the chairs. The fact hit Luke like a brick. Naruto had said the truth. Hercules got glory by retrieving the apples because he had been the first person to do so. Luke wouldn't receive any glory. He would just be following in the footsteps of a hero long dead. Luke realized that his father had only given him this quest because he had continually bugged him for it. It was given to him so he could stop bothering his father. He clenched his fists. Tears threatened to fall from his eyes. All those years running from monsters and trying to get his father's attention, doing everything and more and putting his life at risk countless times, and this is what he gets in return. But he wouldn't be seen crying in front of Chiron and Naruto. He got up, turned his head away from both of them so they couldn't see his tears, and started walking away with strained movements. Naruto looked puzzled. Chiron sighed. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked Chiron, still puzzled. "No, Naruto, you just spoke the truth. However, it's the truth that hurts the most sometimes," Chiron said and made a move to follow Luke. Naruto could clearly see that the retreating boy was crying, if his trying to hide the fact so much was any indication. "Wait, Chiron, I did this, I will fix it." With this, he got up and walked in the direction Luke had gone towards. He found him in the woods, hacking away at a tree with his sword. "Is he dead yet?" Naruto asked him. He didn't make a move to hide his tears now. He kept hacking away at the tree without a care in the world like a madman. Naruto sighed and sat down at the foot of another tree, with his back leaning against its trunk. Just let me know when you've let it out. Luke seemed not to hear him. He kept hacking and hacking and hacking until he couldn't anymore. His sword fell from his hands, and he leaned against the damaged trunk of the tree. I tried so hard to get his attention. I wanted him to notice me so much, Luke said, and this is what he gives me. A deed already done. A meaningless quest. You were right, Naruto. A deed already done? Yes. But meaningless? No. Luke looked down at him, where he was sitting at the foot of the tree. You said this was your first quest, right? He asked him. Yeah, but, so maybe, he is testing you. As you said, he didn't pay much attention to you before. He does not know you well. Maybe this quest is a test to evaluate your capabilities. Maybe he is giving you an easy quest, a quest already done, to ready you for something bigger he has planned. Luke looked at him with wide eyes. As much as he wanted to hate his dad, Naruto had a point. See kid, it is easy to pity yourself. I am not pitying myself. Luke replied angrily. That is exactly what you are doing, Luke. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Go and complete the damn quest. Do your best. Give your all, as you have always done. And then when you return victorious, we'll see if Hermes gives you another deed already done. Then we'll see what your father's true motives were. Multiple emotions ran through his heart. The most prominent one was that persistent feeling of wanting to prove himself. Even if he had proven himself ever since he fled his home, and even before that, it didn't matter. He would prove himself again now. Thank you, Naruto. I needed this. Yes, kid, you did. As I said, easy to pity yourself, but not as easy to get up and do something about it. Luke would leave for the quest at midday. The hunters had already left a few days ago, in pursuit of the monster that troubled Artemis. He would have thought about going with them, except they were headed east, towards Maine, while his destination lied in the west. Argus would give him a ride to the nearest bus depot in Manhattan. He would then accept a favor from his dad, who was the god of travelers and roads, to help him get to California quickly. The Garden of Hesperides was located on Mount Tamalpais in California. Naruto was going to be traveling with them to Manhattan, since he was going to leave camp as it is, so might as well save himself some trouble and hop in Argus' van. They were to leave in 15 minutes. Luke was enthusiastically checking if he had everything he would need for his first ever quest. Naruto's words had moved him, and given him the hope that he had initially lost. Naruto sat at the porch playing pinochle with Chiron and Dionysus. Naruto also seemed to be winning every single round, and Dionysus seemed to be losing every single round. Chiron managed to score a win here and there, but both he and Dionysus had already grown several dollars poorer. I swear this kid is cheating somehow. Dionysus had just lost another $5 to Naruto. He smiled and raised his hands in an "I am innocent" gesture. Sure, it has nothing to do with the fact that I may be better at this than you. Chiron spoke. This is hardly a game of skill, and more of luck. But I have to say, he seems to have the devil's luck at that. Dionysus scoffed. Sure he does. He reached out for his Diet Coke can, but found Naruto already sipping on it. He grunted and made another can appear, but just as he was about to reach out for it, Naruto dropped the previous can that was now empty and grabbed the new one. After a long swig, he put it down and grumbled thanks. Dionysus shook his head and made another can appear. He had grown quite used to the disrespectful blonde trying to set him off by now. And he also knew that if he did something to set him off, and he didn't get set off, it set off the blonde in return. And he was right. For Naruto, nothing was quite as frustrating as a man who wouldn't get frustrated, no matter how hard you try to frustrate him. But he wasn't known as the prankster demon for hell in his good old days for nothing. He had a special gift of frustrating people. He did that by winning another round. Half. Dionysus all but screamed in frustration. And that was the moment a little girl chose to walk in on them. She was around 10 years old and had sharp gray eyes. Chiron saw her and smiled in a fatherly manner. Ah, good morning Annabeth. Did you need something? Annabeth said, good morning, Chiron. Luke told me to tell Naruto that they were running late. Well then, tell them that if they're already late, there isn't no harm in being a little later, Naruto said to her. I ain't leaving till I rob this man of all his belongings. He gestured to Dionysus with a smile, who scoffed. I know better than to get myself legitimately robbed. I've lost enough today. Now, I shall mourn." And with that, Dionysus got up and started walking towards the door of the big house. "By which you mean chug cans of Diet Coke. Since I am forbidden from drinking wine, my heart goes out to you," Naruto said, with mock sympathy. "Your genuine feelings of sympathy are greatly appreciated," Dionysus said, and shut the door behind him. Naruto turned to see Chiron smiling. "What?" Naruto asked him. Chiron's smile grew a little more. "I suppose you've got quite a nice friendship going on here. I had a drunkard for a teacher and a drunkard for a motherly figure. What's wrong with a drunkard for a friend? Even if said drunkard isn't allowed to actually drink." Chiron laughed lightly. "Now, please do not delay the boy's quest any further. And do not stay here any longer. The gods alone know how unwilling I am to ever play pinochle with you ever again." It was Naruto's turn to laugh. Then he gestured to Annabeth to lead the way. As they walked down the stairs of the porch, Annabeth said to him, "I saw you cheating." Naruto looked at the girl. "Did you now?" You could clearly see Mr. D's cards in the glass of the window behind him, but I don't know how you could see Chiron's cards. "Hush now, girl, don't go around spilling all my secrets," Naruto said, trying to look alarmed. "How did you see Chiron's cards?" she asked him. "Are you that convinced that I couldn't have at least played a little fairly and not cheated by trying to see Chiron's cards?" Naruto asked her incredulously. "You were already cheating by seeing Mr. D's cards in the window. So you wouldn't have hesitated to see Chiron's cards as well if you could." Naruto smiled sheepishly. "Hey, I suppose that's true. You're quite observant for such a young girl." Annabeth blushed at the compliment, but said, "You haven't answered my question." "Ah, won't let it go, will you? Very well then." The dew on the leaves of the plant near the porch were at a perfect angle to reflect his cards. Annabeth looked doubtful, as if he was trying to be sarcastic. "Are you trying to make a joke?" "No, not at all," Naruto said solemnly. "So you saw the reflection of his cards in the dewdrops? There is no way they should have been visible from that far away," Annabeth said stubbornly. Naruto laughed lightly. "You'll find a lot of things that you thought invisible to be visible, but only if you look carefully." They reached the van after a short walk. Luke saw him and shouted angrily, "What made you so late?" "Oh, I was carrying out a robbery," Naruto said and got in the shotgun seat of the van. Luke looked puzzled and Annabeth smiled. Soon, Luke and Argus were speeding away, with Argus driving and Luke sitting in the back. Naruto looked at the driver, and on his cheek he saw a pair of, were those eyes? Not just a pair, but multiple pairs, he came to realize. Argus had eyes all over his visible body, his arms, his cheeks, his neck, everywhere. Naruto felt sorry for the guy. Meanwhile, Argus had seen Naruto get a good look at him for the first time. If he was surprised, he didn't show it. And people's first reaction to seeing his eyes was usually not the sad expression that Naruto had on his face for some reason. "Do you have eyes on your ass too?" he asked him. Argus was positively surprised. So surprised, in fact, that he momentarily lost control of the car and it swerved slightly. "I didn't mean to be rude, of course, I was just curious." "Must be incredibly difficult to sit on your eyes," Naruto said after seeing that he had given offense. "I wonder if it is incredibly difficult for you to not be so annoying," Luke said to him. Naruto smiled, "It's my talent." Luke groaned, "You're impossible. As impossible as the chances of you completing the quest?" He teased the young demigod. Luke groaned, louder this time. He turned on the radio of the car and increased the volume. Even radio right now would be better than the annoying comments of this irksome blonde. Earthquakes continue to shake the state of Maine down to its very cores, as they have for the past day. Richter scale puts the magnitude of the latest earthquake to 4.2. Earthquakes are rare in the state, and this phenomenon of continuous earthquakes has baffled various scientists looking in on this weird occurrence. They all exchanged looks. Maine was where the hunters of Artemis and the goddess Artemis herself had been going towards. This couldn't be a coincidence. Luke had his quest to see to and Argus had his driving to see to. But Naruto, however, had nothing to see to. Despite his claims that said otherwise, not one person at Camp Half-Blood believed that the first thing Naruto would do after getting back to his apartment was not sleep. "Isn't Maine where that goddess and her Girl Scout were going?" he inquired. "Yeah, the timing is too convenient to be just a coincidence," Luke answered from the backseat. "I thought so too." Maybe they finally encountered that monster they had been searching for. But if hunting one monster can cause tremors in a whole state, then it really must be a formidable one. Luke wondered. Naruto thought for a moment, I think I am going to go to a trip to Maine. Luke looked surprised. What for? Why, I obviously can't pass up an opportunity to see how you Greeks fight, although I don't have too high expectations from what I've already seen. Luke looked annoyed. Annoyed became a defining characteristic for anyone anywhere near a few yards of the blonde. His ability to annoy was unheard of. Meanwhile, the radio station continued. Scientists have determined that the tremors have been originating from the Hamlin Peak, the second highest mountain in Maine. However, the exact cause of the tremors remains unknown, posing a mystery to quite a number of scientists. Keep listening for live updates on the tremors as we receive them. How are you going to get there? Luke asked Naruto. I wasn't being serious. Although, now that you mention it, Sasuke's ability to shadow travel suddenly came across his thoughts. He could be there in just a couple seconds. And this opportunity to assess if these gods and goddesses posed a threat to him would be too convenient to pass up. He also did not know if this goddess of the moon, Artemis, was capable enough to destroy this monster, or if the monster posed any threat to the civilian population of the state. In just a short while, Argus dropped Naruto off at his apartment in 4th Avenue, close to the 5th Avenue, where the Empire State Building stood tall and proud. He still had a hard time imagining there was a whole damn mountain on top of it, but he had seen weirder things after all. As he walked to his apartment, his thoughts wandered to how much his lifestyle had changed just in a few days. He was living a peaceful, ignorant life, as he had been for centuries now, but being fate's favorite chew toy, he obviously wasn't allowed to take a break that lasted more than a couple centuries. He had gotten involved in all of this divine bullshit, between gods and their children and monsters and weird horse humans. He had gotten involved despite his pledge to not affect the course of history anymore, because he had affected enough courses by now that it certainly did not give the same kick that it did 1,000 years ago. See, this is one of the problems that comes with being overpowered and immortal. You grow bored with things. And you grow tired of everything. But he pushed these thoughts aside as he walked to his bedroom. He closed the curtains, making the room partially dark, as some sunlight managed to pass through the cloth of the curtain, bathing the room in a cool orange light. He then took off his shirt. He put 2 fingers on the center of his chest, and traced an invisible path. He made a couple deft swirls here and there, and in a couple seconds, the path he had traced with his fingers glowed black on his chest. It was a seal, elegantly crafted onto his chest, which sealed a major chunk of his chakra and most of his powers. He walked to the mirror after the glow had died down. He looked himself in the eye, and his iris morphed into a gradient red color with 3 tomos surrounding the pupil. He didn't think he would need to go as far as to use the Sharingan if he got into a tough situation, but he had learned to never underestimate an opponent. And especially not an opponent you know nothing about. The seal on his chest sealed most of his powers, along with the Sharingan. He had multiple stages designed into the seal. The first stage allowed 1/7 of the total sealed power to be released, which included his Sharingan. There were 7 such stages, and unlocking each stage gave his access to a greater chunk of his abilities and chakra. He had not fought at his full potential for several thousand years now, and he hoped that he never would have to. He had already caused enough death and destruction. Naruto walked out of his bedroom and proceeded towards the fridge. Fighting with a full stomach might be discouraged by some, but they were pussies. Nothing as good as a fight after a cup of ramen. He noticed that the fridge was upside down somehow, and empty. He then noticed upon further inspection, a large black mass of fur curled up in the kitchen. Sasuke, not again. He emerged at the base of the mountain where the monster was supposed to be, on the back of his pet hellhound. He just felt as if he had just experienced a roller coaster ride, except 1,000 times faster, through cold darkness. He hadn't been able to see a damn thing after Sasuke had sunk into the shadow of their building in the alley below, and he hadn't activated the Sharingan to get a better vision lest he see something he regrets seeing. After all, no one could say what went down in this infinite realm of darkness. They emerged from the shadow of the mountain itself. It rose tall and proud to their north, and to their south was another mountain, which seemed just as tall, but he knew that it wasn't because Hamlin Peak was the second tallest mountain of the state, and the tallest one was 1.5 miles away. They were on a huge rock that jutted out of the side of the mountain. Naruto walked towards the edge of the rock and looked down. Around a few thousand feet up. Which means we still have a few thousand feet to go before we reach the summit. Sasuke looked at him innocently. As he looked down the edge, a massive roar resonated across the mountains, coupled with an earthquake so strong. Naruto almost lost his footing and toppled over the edge. But fortunately, he held his balance as the whole Hamlin Peak shuddered like it had been dropped into freezing water. He looked at his hellhound and said, "Well, you got me here, now get me to the peak." And he hopped onto his back again. Sasuke was quick for a dog as large as a damn bus. He bounded up from the huge rock they had been on and ran up the sloping surface. As soon as they were out of the thick forest of pine trees, Naruto spied a trail close by. It was a simple track of crushed grass and rocks, and Sasuke ran along it. As he made his way towards the summit of the huge mountain, more tremors greeted them. Pretty soon, they came up on an enormous wall that encompassed the whole summit. It was a barrier made of rocks, and it rose around 50 feet high, blocking the summit from view. Sounds of a battle could be heard up ahead, with a few loud crashes and explosions here and there. Naruto hopped off his pet's back and made his way towards the wall. He started walking up the wall. Sasuke looked at his owner strangely. Never had he seen a trick such as this. As Naruto came up on the top of the wall, the scene of a battle unfurled around him. There were around 50 hunters, who were fighting strange giants with 6 arms. They looked like clay statues and they were 8 feet tall each. They were far superior in numbers as compared to the hunters, and they pelted them with rocks they made in their palms. But that wasn't the major attraction of the battle. An 11-year-old girl in pure white regal clothes was fighting a giant around 35 feet tall. He had snakes for feet and his hair fell on his shoulders in greenish-brown locks. He was a disgusting sight to see. A silver arrow every here and there could be seen, embedded into his flesh. However, they were mere pins against the hulking giant. He was trying to swat the little girl out of the sky who was floating around and firing arrows every now and then, and his snake legs hissed and snapped whenever she came into range. An arrow was fired, and it embedded into his shoulder and exploded, but it wasn't enough. The giant let out another grunt of pain, and put out the flames on his shoulder with his left hand. The shoulder was horribly burnt and sizzling, but leaves from nearby trees inside the walls floated towards the giant and settled on his wounds. When they fell away, they were all dried up and his wounds were healed. This routine kept up for as long as the blonde had the patience to see. The girl, who could only be Artemis, would float around in the air and fire arrows, and leaves would heal the giant's wounds. The hunters weren't faring much better. Around a dozen of them had fallen, with wounds to the head, and more kept falling. Then Naruto Namikaze jumped into the battle. He spied Zoe somewhere, firing arrows in rapid succession wherever she could see something with more than 2 arms. A 6-armed giant crumpled into dust every time an arrow was let loose. He hopped around the mud giants and the hunters and popped up next to her. "Fancy seeing you here," he said and flashed her a smile. Zoe looked surprised at first, then alarmed, then angry. "What the hell are you doing here?" she shouted at him. He suddenly reached out for something in his pocket, and pulled out a strange leaf-shaped blade and flicked it towards her in a smooth movement. It was quicker than she would have believed, and she had no time to cry out or move out of the way. However, when it hit a particularly large piece of rock that was sailing towards her midair, split it into multiple pieces, and flew straight through and embedded into the skull of an Earthborn, she realized he hadn't been aiming for her after all. "Helping, of course," he said with another smile. The battle was too serious to argue. She had seen the blonde's skill in battle, and if even a moment's distraction could result in a rock knocking her out. She just made an irritated sound, and said, "Then, help." The hunters and Artemis were in a sticky situation. Soon as they had chased the scent of the monster to the summit of the Hamlin Peak, the walls that suddenly emerged around them had trapped them all. Then the giant appeared, and the assault of the Earthborn began. The hunters were trapped and could not leave, and Artemis couldn't change into her divine form, lest she risk killing all her hunters who accidentally looked at her. And even Artemis was no match for a giant in her 11-year-old form. They could not call on Olympus for aid. The walls that formed a circle around them cut them off from the world outside. It wasn't just the walls, the place brimmed with ancient magic which trapped them in a barrier. Magic more ancient than the gods or the giants themselves. Naruto's hand darted into his pocket, and he pulled out those strange knives, worn onto his fingers by the ring at the end of their handle. Every time his hand swung, 5 Earthborns crumbled to dust, as he nimbly darted around the rocks thrown at him. He jumped up as a large rock was thrown at him, and kicked it right back into the face of the Earthborn who threw it. Before the rock even hit its owner, he kicked another rock in midair which sailed towards another Earthborn. Both crumpled to dust. With every moment of his, a couple Earthborn were converted to dust. He spied a young girl, around 13, surrounded by 6 Earthborn. She reached out for another arrow from her quiver, but to her dismay, she noticed it was empty. Naruto quickly made his way towards the girl, and kicked an Earthborn in its torso, sending it flying away several feet behind, and he broke into dust and mud on impact with the ground. The heads of all remaining 5 of the Earthborn traced the flight of their brother simultaneously as he soared through a few feet above the ground. Their distraction cost them dearly. Naruto pulled out 2 kunai from his pocket, which had a storage seal inked inside them. He lunged to his right, and cut off the arms on one side of 2 Earthborn in range with a smooth upwards cut with both his arms. As 6 arms hit the ground and turned to mud, Naruto did not even give them a chance to feel their pain. He ducked under a thrown rock and plunged the kunai into the tummy of the 2 Earthborn. It felt like stabbing a sand castle. Even as mud leaked from where he had stabbed the Earthborns, he pushed his hand in further, and he cut his way through the small giant's guts and his hands plunged out on the other side. They melted into a pile of mud. He jumped into the air to avoid more rocks thrown at him, and quickly turned mid-air, arcing his hand all the way around and letting the kunai on his left hand loose. It sailed towards the Earthborn directly behind him and embedded itself right into its groin. It did not cry out, but its pain was clearly visible on its melting face. The remaining 2 Earthborn had a pained expression on their faces as their hands subconsciously reached out and covered their groins. He turned around to both of them. So much for being 8 foot tall and having 6 arms. Guess you guys aren't all that hard down there, he said mockingly, and jumped between them and sliced off their necks in one smooth spin. As they crumpled in mud around either side of him, Zoe shouted, "Don't bother with them. They'll keep coming long as that giant over there is alive." Naruto looked towards the 35-foot giant, who was still fighting Artemis, flying around midair. "You mean Mr. Big and Mean right there?" he said as he pointed towards the giant. "Yes, we'll deal with the Earthborn. Help Lady Artemis if you can." Zoe looked like she wanted to say something else, but she was interrupted by an Earthborn who was unfortunate enough to come in her way. "Oh, young lady, I sure can," he said with a grin, and made his way towards the giant. He had fought bigger things before. This was not anything new to him. He began running towards the giant. Seeing the familiar blonde running towards the direction of the giant, Artemis was alarmed. "Leave, mortal. This is Gratian, you are no match for him. Warn Chiron. Warn Olympus of his rising." Artemis shouted at him urgently. In her distraction, the giant smacked the back of his palm into the moon goddess. She was sent flying over in the direction of the walls. She smacked into the walls, hard, and they cracked. But even as she fell towards the ground, the cracks began filling up as mud and stones rose from the ground itself to mend the walls. In no time, they were good as new, revealing no sign that a divine goddess had smacked into them just a second before. "Why bother Olympus when I can help it?" Naruto said, and jumped up into the air. The thrust behind his jump was enough to send him in level to Gratian's eyes. He had quick reflexes for being 35 foot tall. His right hand darted to the blonde and he caught him between his fingers. "The goddess of the moon herself has not been able to beat me. What do you think a mere human such as you will be able to do?" His voice was deep and gruff, as if he had a really bad throat. His eyes had mirth and mock in them. "Beat you?" Naruto grabbed the thumb and index finger of the giant, and started pushing them away. Gratian's grip on him started loosening. Impossible, such strength for a human. He did not get a chance to finish. As soon as the grip was loose enough, Naruto slipped out of the giant's palm and darted towards his face. He thrust his foot into the giant's forehead. Gratian lost his balance and fell backwards, but before he hit the ground, another kick was planted into his chest. The impact felt like a bullet hitting him. A really big, really strong bullet. He smacked into the ground, crushing half a dozen Earthborn underneath him. However, the giant did not give the blonde a chance to continue his assault. He got up the quickest in the history of fallen giants getting up, and grabbed the blonde in his palm. He crushed the Naruto between his fist. It should have been enough to squeeze the intestines out of a normal human, and even a demigod, but Naruto was neither, as Gratian promptly discovered a moment later. He let out a scream, as a blade suddenly protruded from the back of his hand. The blade was pushed towards the junction of the middle and index fingers, and it split the giant's palm into two. Golden blood gushed out of his severely damaged left hand. Leaves and grass floated towards the wound, and it began to heal, but this time, Naruto did not stop his assault. He fell down to the giant's feet, and positioned the blade of his sword next to the head of the snake on the giant's left foot. As he had suddenly left Gratian's field of vision, it gave him a momentarily advantage of keeping him hidden. With the blade positioned right next to the snake's huge neck, Naruto ran, keeping the blade in position. The blade ripped right through its neck, beheading the snake. Naruto continued running, and cleaved through the head of the snake on his other foot. Golden blood gushed out from the giant's feet, and he let out a scream of pain. His hand had already healed however, and he quickly punched the blonde standing on the ground from above. The impact of his huge fist was enough to make the ground itself crack, but it cracked at the feet of the blonde. The punch had been stopped midair by the hands of the blonde, both extended upwards. The giant retracted his hand backwards quickly, in an effort to send the blonde flying. However, he grabbed Endeshi that he had let fall to the ground to stop Gratian's punch between his feet, and arched his legs upwards. The blade between his feet stabbed into the wrist of the giant, and blood gushed out. Naruto held his fist in a firm grip, grabbing onto his middle finger with both hands. He stood on the giant's palm, and pulled. Putting all of his strength in, the nerves on his face and arms swelling from the effort, he managed to rip out the finger from his palm with nothing but his bare hands. The finger was almost as big as him, and it fell to the ground in another shower of golden blood. Gratian screamed from the combined pain in his feet and hands. Artemis had joined into the battle. Her doubts about the blonde surviving the battle had gone the moment he poked his dark sword into his palm. She fired explosive arrows into the wounds of the giant, burning the leaves and grass away before they could heal him. She had fought him in the Gigantomachy, which seemed like eons ago. He was one of the giants who weren't born to slay a specific god or goddess, but rather were born with the purpose of helping their other siblings. He was nowhere near as powerful as some of his other nasty siblings, but the fact that he had managed to completely reform was alarming. Her thoughts stopped wandering off the moment Gratian let out another cry. He held a hand over one of his eyes, and his golden blood leaked out from between his fingers. Artemis immediately began pelting him with arrows of all sorts. Explosive arrows, arrows that oozed acid and arrows so sharp they were capable of hitting a boulder and coming clean out from the other side. She also summoned a huge cast of falcons that tore into the giant's flesh with their sharp beaks and talons, and disoriented and distracted him in general. Artemis had to think of something, and quick. She knew her hunters wouldn't last forever, and the blonde that who had aided her so valiantly would definitely be tired by now. However, one look at him told her otherwise. He masterfully avoided the giant's attempts to grab him with his hands and crush him under his feet and kept slicing here and there with his endeshi. Everywhere the blade touched, there was a shower of the golden blood of the immortal giant. He was another mystery she did not want to get into right now. She could not transform into her divine form and use her more destructive attacks, unless she wanted to risk the lives of all her hunters. All she could right now was pelt the giant with arrows, and hope that the blonde did not get himself killed. But with how things were going so far, he didn't look he was going to. The giant was bleeding from everywhere the eye fell, and also from everywhere it did not fall. He was missing various fingers and an ear. One of his eyes had been stabbed, rendering the eye useless. But Gratian was not a giant for nothing. Despite being completely covered in his own blood, he was still fighting relentlessly. "Why the fuck won't you go down?" Naruto gritted his teeth as he stabbed the back of the giant's left knee with sword. He had kept up this routine for so long now, that he was getting thoroughly bored of it. He did not want to use any jutsu, because of the simple reason that when people see you breathing fire or yeeting away rotating masses of super compressed energy, they tend to ask questions. But he couldn't keep stabbing away at the giant either. The hunters were being more and more overwhelmed each second. They would soon be completely overwhelmed, which was something he did not want. Ah well, he supposed he would have to use it after all. His eyes morphed into a shade of red, the color of blood, with 3 tomo surrounding it. He jumped up to eye level of the giant, and stared him in his single remaining eye. Genjutsu. Sharingan.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.